This is a story of a high school girl who somehow becomes entangled with a school teacher who hates her, because this girl secretly ships her teachers, male teachers. The story begins with Yumi, a seemingly ordinary school student. However, she harbors a rather scandalously creative secret. She secretly writes wildly romantic BL web novels, essentially stories centered around boys' love, all while carefully keeping this passion hidden from everyone around her. Unfortunately, her literary brilliance exists mostly in her own imagination, because in reality, her novels are, let's just say, not exactly reader magnets. Despite having written an impressive total of 100 episodes so far, each one receives barely 1 or 2 views. And as for comments, those remain as absent as a disciplined student in a last period class. This complete lack of recognition leaves her constantly frustrated and disheartened. At that moment, her younger brother Yudo enters the scene, fully aware of his sister's secret hobby. Armed with this knowledge, he treats it like a lifetime blackmail subscription, casually extorting favors from her whenever it suits him. Today's demand, for instance, involves getting him a bottle of Coke. Yumi reluctantly buys it from the market, and on her way back, she notices something intriguing. 4 exceptionally attractive boys have just moved into the neighboring house. While they are simply exercising and chatting like normal people, Yumi, viewing the world through the dramatic lens of a BL novelist, instantly transforms the scene into a full-blown romantic spectacle. In her imagination, their every movement becomes suggestive. Their casual conversations turn into intense emotional exchanges, and honestly, her brain deserves an award for turning basic stretching into forbidden romance. Watching them fuels her creativity, giving her fresh ideas for her next novel, so she continues to stare at them with an amused smile. However, when 2 of the boys notice her staring rather suspiciously, they grow confused about her intentions. Realizing she might have been caught, Yumi quickly decides to leave, while the boys are left wondering who exactly this strange girl was. The scene then shifts to Yumi's home, where the family is having breakfast together. She informs her mother that the twin brothers who used to live across the street have moved out, and new people, presumably those same 4 boys, have taken their place. Her mother responds by emphasizing the importance of maintaining good relationships with neighbors, a statement that carries the subtle authority of someone who clearly runs the household. Meanwhile, Yumi's father appears noticeably cautious, speaking only after carefully choosing his words, as if one wrong sentence might sign his emotional death warrant. At the same time, Yudo resumes his blackmail routine, prompting Yumi to reluctantly give up her breakfast bowl to him. As a result, she ends up heading to school after eating barely anything. Once outside, she spots 2 of the same boys arguing. Curious, she hides and begins listening to their conversation. Although they are actually discussing something completely ordinary, Yumi's imagination once again takes over, rewriting their dialogue into something dramatically intense, one insisting he does not want to do something, the other demanding that he must, even threatening force, while the first resists and the second claims he cannot possibly restrain himself. In reality, however, they are simply discussing whether to go somewhere by car. Meanwhile, Yumi is thoroughly entertained, mentally scripting an entire BL scene out of thin air. Suddenly, an insect lands on her face, prompting her to check her reflection on her phone to fix herself. Unfortunately, the boys notice her, and one of them assumes she has been recording them. Irritated, he immediately approaches her. Yumi, however, was genuinely just fixing her hair, but when she looks at him closely, she is momentarily captivated by how attractive he is. This boy is named Wuhan, a person with a temperament so short that patience probably avoids him out of self-respect. Wuhan confronts her, demanding to know why she was recording them. Yumi quickly denies it, explaining that she did no such thing and was merely adjusting her hair. However, Wuhan refuses to believe her and insists that she delete the video immediately. She continues trying to explain, but just then, another boy, Dongju, arrives and asks what is going on. Wuhan explains the situation, accusing Yumi again, while she repeats her explanation, clarifying that an insect had landed on her face and she was simply dealing with it. Dongju believes her, but Wuhan remains unconvinced. He goes on to remark that students these days will post anything online just to gain views and comments. Hearing this strikes a nerve in Yumi, whose own work suffers from a painful lack of both. Overwhelmed, she suddenly bursts out, emotionally confessing that she desperately craves views and comments, having written a full 100 episodes with what she proudly considers great endings, yet not receiving even a single comment to date. She declares that neither of them could possibly understand her frustration. The outburst leaves both boys staring at her in confusion, clearly questioning what just happened. Dongju tries to smooth things over, explaining that his friend has trust issues and dislikes photos and videos, so his behavior should not be taken personally. However, Wuhan continues pressing the issue, questioning why she was hiding if she was not recording. He then attempts to snatch her phone. Yumi resists, unwilling to show her phone due to the BL content stored on it, but in the struggle, her phone falls to the ground. She is horrified to see that the screen has shattered. The boys are also taken aback. Enraged, Yumi yells at Wuhan, sarcastically asking if he feels satisfied now and accusing him of having no shame for troubling her like this. Dongju offers to pay for the repair, but Wuhan still insists on checking the phone. Fed up, Yumi declares that she wants nothing from them and prepares to leave. However, Wuhan delivers a final warning, explaining in a sharp tone that school uniforms exist so that misbehaving students like her can be identified easily, and if he ever sees any such video posted anywhere, he will not let her off. Internally cursing him with every creative insult her mind can generate, Yumi storms away from the scene. Shortly after, the remaining two boys join Wuhan and Dongju, reminding them that they are getting late, and the four of them finally leave together. On the way, when Wuhan notices Yumi walking off, he signals toward her with a subtle but unmistakable gesture implying that he is keeping an eye on her. Yumi, clearly unimpressed, responds with an exaggerated sulky expression, silently mocking his warning. At Yumi's school, which happens to be an all-girls institution, she spots her best friend Goya waiting outside. Yumi mentally introduces her as someone incredibly close to her, while also revealing, with a mix of admiration and disbelief, that Goya has been dating multiple boys since 6th grade and still has not managed to find her so-called true love. An achievement that, at this point, deserves either sympathy or a lifetime award for persistence. The two friends begin walking together, and Yumi recounts the entire chaotic morning, including how her phone screen ended up shattered. Goya immediately suggests that she should have demanded repair money from those boys, before casually dropping the bombshell that she has just gone through yet another breakup. Yumi reacts with visible shock, asking if it happened again, to which Goya confirms, wondering aloud when she will finally find genuine love. Yumi, reflecting on her own situation, admits that she too has no idea when she will experience love, especially since she does not even have a boyfriend. She goes on to say that she believes if she ever truly falls in love, she would be able to write her novels much better. Goya agrees, pointing out that only then would she be able to explain love more convincingly, which might finally bring her the views and comments she desperately seeks. Then, with a hint of playful accusation, Goya remarks how strange it is that despite being best friends, Yumi has never revealed her writing ID or even mentioned what kind of novels she writes. Yumi quickly cuts her off, declaring in a dramatic tone that this secret will accompany her all the way to her grave, and therefore, Goya should not overthink it. Laughing and chatting, the two enter the school building, only to find a crowd of girls gathered outside the teacher's office. Curious, they learn that 4 new teachers have joined, and apparently, they are exceptionally attractive. Naturally, Yumi and Goya join the crowd to see what the excitement is about. One of their friends excitedly explains that the new teachers are young, having just completed college, and are not only highly intelligent, but also remarkably handsome. She even declares that for the first time, she feels genuinely happy to be studying in a girls' school because clearly, education becomes far more appealing when aesthetics are involved. Inside, a teacher begins introducing the newcomers. She first introduces Jaon, the physical education teacher, who has broken numerous records during his college years. Then she introduces Daju, the language teacher, who knows multiple languages but will only be teaching Japanese and English here. The girls, upon hearing about him, whisper among themselves that he comes from a very wealthy family. Next, Dongju is introduced as the Korean literature teacher, who had written a poem in 2020 that gained significant popularity. Goya instantly takes a strong liking to him, her excitement visibly growing as she watches him. Yumi, meanwhile, recognizes him as one of the boys she encountered earlier that morning and begins to feel nervous, wondering if the other one might also be here. Her fear is immediately confirmed when Woo-han is introduced as the new mathematics teacher, described as highly intelligent, someone who broke numerous records during his college days and had multiple job opportunities, yet chose to teach at their school. Yumi is utterly shocked, internally panicking at the realization that this same infuriating person is now going to be her teacher, and she can practically feel her peaceful school life filing for resignation. Meanwhile, the girls become so overwhelmed with excitement after seeing the four teachers that they push against the door with such force that the lock breaks, causing them all to tumble inside. Everyone is stunned by the sudden chaos, and even the teacher scolds them harshly for their lack of discipline. The girls immediately scatter and run away, but as Yumi gets up, Woo-han notices her and instantly recognizes her as the same troublesome girl from earlier. Yumi, upon seeing him, makes an annoyed face and walks away while glaring at him, silently continuing their unspoken rivalry. Just then, another girl rushes in, retrieves her fallen phone, quickly shuts the door, and runs off again, adding a final touch of absurdity to the situation. Afterward, the group of friends gathers to discuss the new teachers, enthusiastically declaring how handsome they all are. They even jokingly announce that their long-standing crush on their music teacher, Eden, is now officially over. Ironically, at that very moment, teacher Eden appears and asks if they were talking about him. The girls awkwardly bid him goodbye and walk away, leaving him confused about what just transpired. Later, in the classroom, the friends continue their discussion, debating which teacher they like the most. Goya confidently states that she likes teacher Dongju the most. One of the girls comments that he seemed rather quiet, prompting Goya to glare at her in irritation. The girl quickly apologizes, clarifying that her own interest lies not with Dongju, but with the Japanese language teacher. Goya then turns to Yumi and asks which teacher she prefers. Yumi, however, remains silent. After all, it is not exactly easy to admit that she has already had a confrontation with one of them. Soon, they receive the news that not only will these four teachers be teaching them, but one of them will also be their homeroom teacher. This revelation causes an uproar in the class until a girl named Hasu, the most intelligent student in the class, firmly tells everyone to quiet down. Meanwhile, Yumi and Goya step outside to continue their conversation. While in the teacher's office, the new teachers are checking their schedules. Woo-han, however, is entirely absorbed in cleaning, revealing an almost obsessive love for tidiness. He is the kind of person who cannot tolerate even the slightest trace of mess. On the other hand, Daju is busy clicking photos, while Woo-han simultaneously tries to hide his face, clearly uncomfortable with cameras. Daju notices that Woo-han is taking cleaning to an extreme level and even deriving satisfaction from it, so he jokingly tells him to have some restraint before others start thinking he has lost his mind. Woo-han, however, complains that he does not like Daju's face and asks for him to be removed from his sight. Daju laughs and retorts that it is not as if he likes Woo-han's face either. Dongju then explains that the seating arrangements are fixed by design and cannot be changed. Woo-han grumbles that this means he will have to tolerate the face of this so-called red monkey, which leaves the other three momentarily stunned. Daju immediately protests, asking him not to call him that, reminding him that he has some dignity too. Just then, Daju fires back by calling Woo-han a battery, clearly not in the mood to lose the argument. Woo-han retaliates by calling him a monkey again, and within seconds, the two of them descend into a full-blown verbal war, throwing insults at each other with impressive creativity. Eventually, their other two friends intervene and force them to calm down before the situation escalates any further. Meanwhile, Yumi is with Goya, who is passionately explaining why she has already fallen so hard for teacher Dongju. She describes that the moment she saw him, she experienced what she calls a first snow feeling, her way of describing first love, the person one genuinely likes from the heart. Yumi, intrigued, wonders aloud when she herself will experience this so-called first snow. She then asks about Goya's previous boyfriends, questioning whether she had ever felt this way for any of them. Goya explains that this feeling is completely different, something she has never experienced before, and that Dongju gives off a very manly and captivating aura. Yumi then shares her own story, revealing that she has already met both teacher Dongju and the math teacher Wuhan. She narrates the entire chaotic morning incident, leaving Goya utterly shocked. Yumi firmly declares that this is exactly why she does not want Wuhan to be their teacher. However, the moment she enters the classroom and sees Wuhan standing there, she is completely stunned and instinctively shuts the door again. Goya, confused, asks what happened, and when Yumi cautiously opens the door once more, she finds Wuhan staring directly at them, especially at her. From now on, Wuhan is their homeroom teacher, and the way he looks at Yumi clearly suggests that he intends to teach her a lesson, as if he has already decided that she desperately needs to learn some manners. On the other hand, Yumi feels as though her soul has temporarily left her body at the mere sight of him. Wuhan is seen taking attendance in class. Meanwhile, the girls cannot stop staring at him, whispering among themselves about how incredibly handsome he is and how lucky they are to have him as their homeroom teacher. For them, attending school daily has suddenly become an exciting privilege rather than a routine obligation. During attendance, Wuhan mentions that Hasu has won a gold medal in KMO. Hasu politely thanks him, while Yumi looks completely confused, having no idea what KMO even stands for. Goya admits that she does not know either. KMO is actually a high-level Korean mathematics competition, which Hasu has successfully won. Wuhan then calls out Jia's name, but she is absent. Shortly afterward, Jia enters the classroom looking slightly disturbed, a detail that Wuhan immediately notices. He continues calling out other names, and when he reaches Yumi, she responds in a rather rude and flat tone. Wuhan, clearly displeased, instructs her to respond properly and not to answer him again until she says yes in a polite manner. After finishing attendance, Wuhan introduces himself to the class. The girls respond with enthusiastic applause, clearly delighted. He then delivers a motivational speech, which the students listen to with surprising attention, almost as if he were performing a soulful concert rather than giving a lecture. Yumi, however, internally questions whether he has come here to teach mathematics or to prepare them for some kind of battlefield, considering the intensity of his tone. Unfortunately for her, Wuhan overhears her muttering and immediately calls her name. He asks about her marks in the last mock test. Yumi hesitates, and when he assumes she scored 40, she blurts out loudly that she actually scored only 4 marks. This revelation sends the entire class into laughter, and even Wuhan is visibly shocked, seemingly wondering how such a score is even mathematically possible. He approaches her and remarks that judging by her attitude, she should perhaps invest some effort into improving her mathematics as well. He then instructs her to meet him in his office later, before walking away. Yumi, now visibly nervous, complains to her friend about why she is being singled out for scolding. Summoning some courage, she later goes to meet Wuhan and begins explaining anxiously that she truly did not record any video of him and even offers to show her phone as proof, pointing out that there is nothing in her gallery or even in recently deleted files. Before she can finish, she starts apologizing profusely, promising that she will never make such a mistake again. However, Wuhan clarifies that the real reason she is standing there is because of her 4 marks, not the earlier misunderstanding. Hearing this, Yumi feels utterly defeated and even pleads for some mercy. Wuhan, however, remains unmoved and tells her to leave, while also asking her to send Jia to him. Disheartened, Yumi walks away. Soon after, Dongju approaches her and apologizes on behalf of Wuhan for his behavior. He explains that Wuhan is someone who is almost always angry, somewhat childish and immature, but not a bad person at heart. He suggests that she should not misunderstand him and that he is probably just upset with her at the moment. After a brief conversation, Yumi mentions that she has to return to her class, and Dongju bids her goodbye before leaving. Watching him walk away, Yumi cannot help but admire him, thinking to herself that he is practically like an angel, while his friend Wuhan, in her opinion, is nothing less than a complete demon. Later, when Goya asks her what happened, Yumi complains that Wuhan, whom she mockingly refers to as Battery, is taking revenge on her under the excuse of her low marks. As punishment, she has been assigned to write sorry 20 pages, which leaves her deeply frustrated. Meanwhile, when Jia meets Wuhan, he notices that she seems troubled and gently tells her that she can share her problems if she wants to. However, Jia does not respond at all. Woo-han then simply tells her to return to class. At that moment, another teacher comments that he should not interfere too much in students' personal lives, implying that it could create issues. Woo-han does not respond, but it is clear that Jia's condition has caught his attention. In the next scene, Dongju arrives in Yumi's class to teach. The moment he enters, the girls are once again completely mesmerized by his appearance, especially Goya, who seems entirely captivated by him. However, when he asks the students to jump, none of the girls are able to perform the task properly, proving that admiration alone does not improve physical coordination. Despite their lack of skill, the girls continue giving their absolute best. Meanwhile, when Daju enters the class to teach Japanese, he begins sharing entertaining stories from his college days, which only makes the girls even more impressed. In fact, thanks to these four strikingly attractive teachers, the entire school now feels unusually cheerful, as though academic stress has collectively decided to take a vacation. At the same time, Woo-han is also teaching his class with full seriousness and discipline. Soon, it is time for school to end. Woo-han asks where Jia has gone, but no one seems to know. Yumi informs him that Jia left immediately after the last class ended. Woo-han glances at Yumi, and she is left wondering why she seems to be the constant target of his strictness, as if she has unknowingly signed up for a lifetime subscription of scoldings. The scene then shifts, showing Yumi outside while throwing garbage, muttering complaints about Woo-han under her breath. Suddenly she notices something. Jong is helping Dongju with exercises. However, as always, Yumi views the situation through her wildly imaginative lens, interpreting their completely innocent interaction as open romance. In her imagination, Dongju is gently holding Jung's hands, commenting on how soft they feel, while in reality, Jung is simply helping relax Dongju's muscles after a long day of teaching. As they begin to leave, Jong casually mentions that he will give him a massage at home later that night, which sends Yumi's imagination spiraling even further into dramatic territory, as if her brain has decided to produce a full series without waiting for a script approval. After this, Yumi went to the library. One of her friends is suffering from a stomachache, so Yumi gives her some medicine, explaining that it was given by her mother. The friend thanks her and leaves, while Yumi becomes excitedly lost in thought about her novels. She begins reflecting on all the themes she has already covered: rich versus poor dynamics, senior-junior relationships, enemies to lovers plots, and suddenly recalls Jong's earlier words about someone being soft, like a soft toy. This sparks a new idea, and she starts imagining characters whose faces resemble Jong and Dongju. In her imagination, Jong playfully teases Dongju, demanding attention over studies, even snatching his pen and throwing it away, creating yet another dramatic storyline entirely inside her head. The scene then transitions to the house shared by the four boys. Dongju is preparing breakfast for everyone, while Jong is getting irritated by the loud alarm coming from Daju's phone. Woo-han, on the other hand, is already ready on time for school and warns them to hurry up before the toast gets cold. Soon, all four are seen having breakfast together, and through their conversation, it becomes clear that the house actually belongs to Daju. Meanwhile, back at school, Yumi appears to be studying very seriously, constantly writing in her notebook. However, the truth is far from academic dedication. She is actually observing Dongju in detail, mentally scanning everything about him, from his behavior to his style and appearance, and writing it all down as material for her novel. After class ends, as Dongju prepares to leave, Goya confidently tells Yumi to watch and learn. She approaches Dongju, stops him, and offers him a chalk stand as a gift, explaining that it will be helpful for him. Dongju politely accepts it, while Goya remains completely mesmerized by him. She later tells Yumi that she has never seen anyone as handsome as Dongju and that he is exactly what she wants, making her admiration very clear. In the following scene, Jong is seen on the ground, and Yumi once again begins analyzing him as if he were a character from her novel. She describes him as having a bold, almost bulldozer-like personality, with a unique charm and distinct style, making him perfect for her second novel character. She also notes how manly he appears, especially in his interactions with Dongju. Soon, the girls gather for a running activity. As the race begins, everyone gives their best effort, but Yumi is at the very back. Seeing this, Jong comes to motivate her, speaking encouraging words that, in Yumi's mind, sound far more emotionally charged than they actually are. Overwhelmed by her own imagination, she starts blushing intensely, and suddenly, fueled by this emotional surge, she begins running at full speed. She runs so fast that she overtakes everyone, astonishingly moving to the front and eventually winning the race. Jung is left completely shocked, wondering how she managed to run so fast. Later, as the other girls react to the result, Jung approaches Yumi and suggests that if she is interested, he can provide her with extra training on Wednesdays to prepare her for competitions. He asks her to think about it, fill out the form, and let him know. Yumi can only stare at him, clearly overwhelmed. As she walks away, she begins questioning why her heartbeat suddenly sped up. She quickly tries to rationalize it, convincing herself that she cannot develop feelings for her teacher. Instead, she insists that these are merely inspirations for her novel characters. After all, in her mind, Dongju and the others exist less as real people and more as perfectly curated fictional material waiting to be written. Yumi had finally sat down to write her story and was deep in thought about her characters. She had already finalized 2 of them, but now she was struggling to decide who should become the 3rd character in her love triangle. At first, she considered using Teacher Daju, the man who had supposedly returned from abroad in pursuit of his lost love. However, after a moment of consideration, she rejected the idea, deciding that he felt far too lightweight for the role. Then she suddenly remembered something Dongju had once said about Wuhan. Dongju had admitted that Wuhan was childish and immature, but insisted that he was a good person at heart. That memory led Yumi to think about Wuhan's fiery personality and endless supply of anger. Instantly, she decided that he would be perfect for jealousy-filled scenes. As a result, Wuhan officially became the 3rd character in her novel. Now that all 3 characters were finalized, Yumi enthusiastically began constructing the plot. In her story, Wuhan would be a mathematical genius, but also an arrogant jerk, a bad boy with a terrible temper. He and Dongju would have completed college together and would already be dating. Dongju, meanwhile, would be majoring in Korean literature. According to Yumi's fictional version of events, Wuhan secretly loved Dongju, but constantly hid his feelings behind strict behavior and endless bullying. As for Dongju, his feelings were completely clear. He had loved Wuhan for years. However, he believed that Wuhan did not care for him nearly as much. Then, the physical education teacher Jong would enter the story. In Yumi's imagination, he had been in love with Dongju ever since their school days. Unfortunately for him, Dongju loved Wuhan and was already dating him. This naturally meant that the PE teacher would spend his time suffering while watching the 2 together. Yumi then imagined the future drama of the story. One day, Dongju would become fed up with Wuhan's behavior and leave him. Filled with regret, Wuhan would return to apologize and beg for another chance, only to be rejected. At that point, Jong would seize the opportunity because his path would finally be clear. Meanwhile, the Wuhan would spend the rest of his days crying and longing for his lost love, a fate that Yumi firmly believed he deserved. The more she thought about it, the more excited she became. She practically congratulated herself for creating such an incredible story. In her mind, it was nothing less than a masterpiece. Without wasting any more time, she decided to begin writing episode 1. She titled the novel We Were Friends and immediately got to work. Inside the novel, Jong was shown angrily pushing Dongju while demanding to know whether he had lost his mind. He insisted that Dongju should realize Wuhan did not love him at all and was merely using him. According to Jong, Wuhan constantly insulted Dongju, yelled at him, and treated him poorly. However, Dongju defended Wuhan, explaining that while he was childish and immature, he was not bad-hearted. Dongju then sincerely thanked Jong for caring so much about him and admitted that Jong was the only person who truly worried about him from the heart. Because of that, he declared that Jong would always remain his best friend. Hearing this left Jong completely shocked. In Yumi's dramatic imagination, he wondered whether he would really be nothing more than a best friend forever. He questioned whether Dongju could not simply stop loving Wuhan and choose him instead. Just then, the story introduced Wuhan. Furious at seeing Jong standing beside his boyfriend, he arrived on the scene with all the confidence of a man who believed dramatic entrances were a personality trait. Dongju immediately became nervous. Wuhan casually walked down in a stylish manner and asked Dongju why he was standing around talking nonsense instead of studying mathematics with him. He then ordered Dongju to come with him. Naturally, Dongju happily followed him. Before leaving, however, Wuhan stopped and deliberately provoked Zhong by proudly declaring that Dongju belonged only to him. Then, he walked away. This infuriated Zhong so much that, in Yumi's fictional version of events, he briefly wanted to kill Wuhan in order to win back the person he loved. However, he was currently powerless to do anything. Back in the present, after finishing this section, Yumi once again began praising her own writing. She genuinely felt she had created something amazing. However, a problem soon occurred to her. These characters were all based on her teachers. She started wondering whether she should even publish the story without their permission. It did not feel entirely right. Therefore, instead of posting the episode, she saved it as a draft. Before stopping, though, she wrote one final scene of the first episode. This extra scene took place during Zhong and Dongju's school days. In her imagination, the two liked each other and were in the middle of a romantic moment when Daju suddenly walked in. Seeing them standing so close together left him completely shocked. He immediately demanded to know what they were doing. Then he awkwardly stood there while buttoning up his shirt. With this scene, Yumi had successfully managed to drag Daju into the novel as well. The story then returned to the present. The next morning, while Yumi was heading to school, she noticed that Wuhan was also on his way. Unlike usual, he was not driving his car and was instead taking the bus. Yumi immediately became annoyed, wondering whether he absolutely had to leave at the exact same time as her. Nevertheless, she continued walking behind him while making annoyed faces. Suddenly, she noticed Wuhan stop walking. He seemed to be checking something, as though something had fallen onto him from above. The very next second, he let out a loud scream before collapsing to the ground unconscious. Yumi was horrified and rushed over to him, wondering what had happened. She tried waking him up, but he remained completely unresponsive. When she finally examined his face, she discovered the cause of the disaster. A pigeon had relieved itself directly on him. Since Wuhan could not tolerate even the slightest dirt or mess, the experience had apparently been too much for his soul to process. Yumi quickly cleaned his face using her handkerchief and grew increasingly worried. There was nobody nearby to help, and she had no idea how to bring him back to consciousness. First, she attempted CPR. When that did not seem to work, she reluctantly prepared herself to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. However, just as she was about to do so, Wuhan finally regained consciousness. Taking a deep breath, he sat up and noticed that his face was clean. Because he was not wearing his glasses, he could not clearly see Yumi standing nearby. So Yumi introduced herself. Wuhan immediately began cleaning himself again, though he still looked thoroughly disgusted by the entire experience. Trying not to laugh, Yumi asked whether he had really fainted just because of pigeon droppings. Wuhan, irritated by the question, explained that it was not merely droppings. They could contain various infections and diseases. Hearing that instantly silenced Yumi. A moment later, Wuhan began searching for his glasses, but they were nowhere to be found. Yumi joined the search and looked everywhere she could. Unfortunately, neither of them could locate them. Then, while searching another area, Yumi suddenly heard a sharp cracking sound beneath her foot. The moment she looked down, all the color drained from her face. The object she had just stepped on was none other than Wuhan's missing glasses. Realizing what she had done, Yumi nearly suffered a heart attack on the spot. Wuhan immediately asked what that strange cracking sound had been. Suspicion crept into his voice as he wondered whether Yumi had accidentally stepped on his glasses. Hearing this, Yumi hesitated for a moment before quickly denying everything, insisting that she had done nothing of the sort. At the same time, she secretly slipped the broken glasses into her bag, hoping nobody would ever discover the truth. Since he could barely see properly, Wuhan asked her for the time. Then he handed her his phone and requested that she find Dongju's number for him. Using his facial recognition lock, Yumi unlocked the phone and pulled up the contact information. Wuhan called Dongju and explained the entire situation, asking him to bring another pair of glasses. In the next scene, everyone is searching for Wuhan's missing glasses. They look everywhere, but naturally, they cannot find them. How could they? The poor souls have no idea that the glasses are currently hiding inside Yumi's bag. Meanwhile, Wuhan puts on a spare pair. Eventually, Daju grows irritated and concludes that someone must have picked them up. Otherwise, they would have found them by now. Hearing this, Yumi nervously agrees, trying her best to look innocent while carrying the very evidence they are searching for. Soon, everyone realizes they are running late for school, so the four teachers prepare to leave. When they get into the car, they notice Yumi staring at them. Naturally, they assume she is asking for a ride. Since all of them are already late, they decide to let her come along. Daju asks whether she is sitting comfortably, and Yumi assures him that she is perfectly fine. Unable to contain her excitement, Yumi immediately messages Goya and tells her that she would never believe where she is right now. She dramatically reveals that she is currently riding to school in the same car as their teachers. Goya is completely shocked after reading the message. Yumi promises that she will explain everything once they arrive at school. At that moment, Woohan reclines his seat, which causes considerable discomfort for Dongju. However, Dongju says nothing. Watching this, Yumi becomes annoyed and concludes that Woohan is unbelievably selfish. In her opinion, he only thinks about himself and constantly bothers poor Dongju. In fact, she starts suspecting that irritating people is probably one of his favorite hobbies. A little later, Dongju begins feeling sleepy. Daju asks whether he failed to sleep properly the previous night. Then, while speaking, Daju kicks Jong's seat and jokingly accuses him of being responsible for Dongju's exhaustion. Jong immediately apologizes and insists that he had not done anything intentionally. He then casually adds that Dongju had needed a second round anyway. The moment Yumi hears this conversation, her eyes practically widen in disbelief. She has absolutely no idea what they are talking about, or rather, she thinks she knows exactly what they are talking about. Daju continues by saying that while he understands the two of them enjoy themselves together, they should still show some mercy to Dongju because he also needs rest. In reality, the conversation means something completely different, but Yumi once again twists every word into something far more scandalous. Silently, she asks for divine forgiveness, because she apparently has no control over her hopelessly dirty imagination. By this point, her face has turned bright red from all the outrageous conclusions she is drawing. Noticing her condition, Jong asks whether something is wrong. He even offers to turn on the air conditioning if she feels hot. Embarrassed, Yumi quickly declines and claims that she is simply enjoying the ride. Eventually, the group arrives at school. The moment they reach the campus, Yumi suddenly realizes the disaster awaiting her. If the other girls see her getting out of a car with the four most popular teachers in school, their fan clubs will probably hold a public trial before lunch. Terrified, she immediately ducks down and begs them not to stop the car where everyone can see her. According to her, nothing good will come from being spotted with them. The four teachers are left somewhat puzzled, but there is not much they can do. They have already arrived at school. As soon as the car enters the campus, girls gather around it as if celebrities have just arrived for a red carpet event. The teachers step out with remarkable composure and walk away, while the students practically lose their minds watching them. Daju, in particular, seems to be enjoying every second of the attention. The next scene shows Jong driving the car away from the crowd and parking it in a quiet section of the parking lot before leaving. Only after he is gone do we finally see Yumi emerge. She has been hiding underneath a coat the entire time. While lying there, she remembers that the coat belonged to Woohan and that he had given it to her to help her avoid being seen. Although she initially makes a face at the thought of him, she eventually admits that Woohan saved her life today. Therefore, for this one day only, she decides not to insult him. Then her thoughts drift back to the earlier conversation between Jong and Daju. Once again, she interprets their words in the most inappropriate way possible and decides that those lines absolutely must be included in her novel. Inspiration, after all, seems to strike her in the strangest places. As soon as she steps out of the car, she nearly falls, but Woohan suddenly catches her. It turns out he has returned to retrieve his coat. After helping her regain her balance, he takes the coat back and then asks her to tell him the truth. He directly questions whether the cracking sound from earlier had actually been his glasses breaking. Despite being guilty, Yumi confidently denies everything and insists that it was not his glasses. Woohan warns her that if he ever discovers she is lying, he will not let her off easily. Then he changes the subject and reminds her about the 20-page apology essay. He expects it on the same day and threatens even harsher consequences if she fails to deliver it. Yumi watches him leave and silently labels him a cruel monster before making an exaggerated face behind his back. The next scene introduces a new student. Wuhan brings a girl into the classroom and explains that she has arrived from Singapore as part of an exchange program. The girl politely greets everyone and introduces herself as Jenny. As she heads toward her seat, Yumi notices that Wuhan is clearly struggling without his original glasses. This realization makes her feel increasingly guilty about hiding the broken pair. Jenny sits beside Jia, but Jia does not make any effort to talk to her. After Wuhan finishes teaching and leaves the classroom, the other girls immediately gather around Jenny and begin trying to speak with her in English. Jenny explains that she knows a little Korean, which helps everyone relax. Yumi and Goya introduce themselves, and one of the girls asks why she chose to come here. Jenny explains that she is a huge fan of Korean food and K-dramas. The girls then ask why she did not choose a school in Seoul, since most exchange students prefer going there. Jenny sheepishly reveals that she had actually intended to choose Seoul, but accidentally selected this school instead. The entire group laughs awkwardly at the confession. Fortunately, Jenny quickly adds that she genuinely likes this place, which instantly makes everyone happier. After that, the girls continue chatting warmly with her. Later, Yumi is desperately trying to repair Wuhan's broken glasses. By now, she has realized that he is genuinely struggling because of them. She works hard to put the pieces back together, but no matter how much she tries, the glasses simply refuse to cooperate. Frustrated and worried, she becomes increasingly stressed. Meanwhile, Daju arrives to teach Japanese. However, instead of paying attention to the lesson, Yumi is completely focused on writing her apology essay. Daju quickly notices this unusual behavior. When Daju approached Yumi's desk, she immediately tried to hide her notebook. Unfortunately, Daju noticed the suspicious movement right away. His expression darkened as he scolded her, questioning how she could possibly work on an assignment given by Wuhan during his Japanese class. He firmly stated that nobody was allowed to ignore either him or his subject while he was teaching, yet Yumi had done exactly that. Meanwhile, Goya had actually been sleeping through the lesson, but thanks to the makeup she had carefully applied around her eyes, nobody realized it, allowing her to escape punishment entirely. At the same time, Wuhan was having a miserable day. His headache had become increasingly severe, and his eyes were bothering him as well. The broken glasses were not ordinary glasses, but a highly specialized and extremely expensive pair that could not be replaced easily. Because of that, the backup glasses he was currently using were causing him constant discomfort and making everyday tasks difficult. Soon afterward, Daju brought Yumi along with him and marched straight to Wuhan. To Yumi's horror, Daju began filing an official complaint against her, explaining that his student had completely ignored Japanese class and spent the entire period writing Wuhan's apology essay instead. Wuhan immediately scolded Yumi and ordered her to read her apology essay aloud. Yumi hesitantly asked whether she really had to read it in front of everyone. Wuhan's answer was a simple and merciless yes. Reluctantly, Yumi began reading. At first, the essay sounded sincere enough. She apologized for giving up on mathematics and admitted that she should have worked harder. However, only moments later, the essay transformed into a lengthy complaint about mathematics itself. She started criticizing the subject, arguing that it was confusing, strange, and impossible for normal people to understand. Hearing this, both Dongju and Zhang burst into laughter. Wuhan stared at her and asked whether she was apologizing or filing a complaint. Eventually, Wuhan decided to move on from the essay and gave her a new responsibility instead. From now on, she would have to keep an eye on Jia. If Jia was absent from class without explanation, Jia would lose 2 points, but Yumi would lose 4. Hearing this left Yumi completely stunned. She demanded to know why she was being punished for someone else's actions. Wuhan calmly explained that classmates should look after one another, which was exactly why she had been given the task. He then dismissed her. Yumi had no intention of leaving quietly. She tried to convince him to listen to her side of things, but Wuhan refused to budge. Left with no choice, she stormed out while making dramatic faces behind his back. Later, when she explained the situation to her friends, they immediately began creating theories. One friend suggested that perhaps Yumi resembled Wuhan's ex-girlfriend, and that he was taking revenge on her because of it. Another claimed that maybe there was some ancient feud between Wuhan and Yumi's family. A third proposed that Wuhan simply disliked Yumi's face. Everyone laughed at these ridiculous possibilities, But Yumi remained genuinely worried because she knew Gia was unlikely to stay out of trouble, which meant she would almost certainly lose 4 points. Goya then announced that she had an idea. The scene immediately shifted, revealing the result of that idea. When Wuhan entered the classroom, he noticed that Yumi appeared seriously ill. Concerned, he walked over to check on her. Upon closer inspection, however, he discovered that she had simply used makeup to make her face look pale. She was not sick at all. Completely unimpressed by her performance, Wuhan began asking her a series of extremely difficult mathematics questions. As expected, Yumi could not answer a single one. Wuhan concluded that she was far more talented at creating drama than studying. As punishment, he assigned her yet another apology essay, this time 10 pages long. Then he walked away, leaving Yumi desperately calling after him. Once he was gone, Yumi immediately began ranting about him. In her opinion, Wuhan must have been her sworn enemy in a previous life because there was simply no other explanation for his behavior. Her frustration soon triggered another fantasy sequence. Inside her imagination, she became the author of her novel confronting her own characters. Since she was technically their creator, she decided she had every right to criticize them. In this imaginary scenario, she praised Dongju and Zhong for doing a good job but aggressively criticized Wuhan. She complained that he could not act properly, that he was ruining scenes, and that despite his shortcomings, he somehow behaved as though he were the star of the story. Suddenly, the fictional version of Wuhan began apologizing to her like a frightened student. He insisted that he was trying his best, but that only made Yumi scold him even more. She demanded to know how he dared to answer back and proceeded to lecture him at length. Since she could never say any of these things in real life, the fantasy ended up being surprisingly therapeutic. By the time she finished imagining the scene, her mood had improved considerably. The next scene takes place during lunch, where the group of friends is enjoying a meal together. Jenny comments on how much she loves the local food. Curious, Goya asks whether Jenny has a boyfriend. Jenny happily confirms that she does, explaining that he currently lives in Brazil. Instantly, all the girls become excited and start demanding details about her love story. Jenny explains that she met her boyfriend during a trip to Brazil. He was a student at a photography school, and the first thing he did was flirt with her. Using cheesy pickup lines, he convinced her to participate in a photo shoot and eventually confessed his feelings. Although Jenny initially found his lines ridiculous, she also thought he was incredibly cute. Before long, the two of them had started dating. Hearing the story, the girls collectively declared it adorable. Meanwhile, Yumi listened with unusual concentration, not because she was interested in romance itself, but because she was mentally collecting dialogue and story ideas that could later be stolen and inserted into her novels. To Yumi, every conversation was secretly research material. Meanwhile, Wuhan had gone for an eye examination. Unfortunately, the doctor informed him that his new specialized glasses would not be ready for another 2 weeks. Since there was nothing more he could do, he stopped by a pharmacy to pick up some medication. As fate would have it, the pharmacy belonged to Yumi's mother. Yumi's mother handed him the medicine and began processing the payment. Then she happened to notice him removing his glasses so he could apply eye drops. The moment he took them off, she found herself staring. Without the glasses, he somehow looked even more handsome than before. She could barely take her eyes off him. When Wuhan noticed her staring, Yumi's mother laughed and commented that he looked exactly like one of those comic book heroes who become even more attractive after removing their glasses. She suggested that he should consider wearing contact lenses instead. At first, Wuhan did not respond and simply prepared to leave. Then he suddenly paused, looked back, and calmly agreed that he did indeed look more handsome without his glasses, almost like a hero who had stepped out of a comic book. Hearing such effortless self-praise made Yumi's mother smile. Wuhan, apparently satisfied after receiving compliments and adding a few of his own, finally left the pharmacy. Later, Zhang gave Yumi an application form for an after-school program. She accepted it and prepared to leave, but then she noticed Wuhan carrying medication with him. This immediately made her wonder whether he was sick. Shortly afterward, Zhang asked Wuhan how things had gone. Wuhan explained that his replacement glasses would take 2 weeks to arrive. Hearing this, Dongju became concerned and asked how he intended to manage until then. The question only made Wuhan more frustrated because ever since losing his glasses, his headaches had been steadily getting worse. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Jia, as usual, began preparing to leave school before the day was officially over. Yumi immediately tried to stop her, pleading with her to stay, and even offering to walk home together if she wanted company. However, Jia ignored every attempt and simply left. Wuhan had witnessed the entire interaction from a distance. Seeing him, Yumi hurried over and pointed out that he had seen her trying her best to stop Jia. She expected at least a little understanding after all her efforts. Instead, Wuhan calmly deducted 4 points from her anyway. Hearing this left Yumi frozen in shock. Her frustration skyrocketed almost instantly. Fuming with anger, she stormed outside and stopped near a school dumpster. There, she stared at Wuhan's broken glasses and replayed every irritating thing he had done to her. First, he had accused her of recording him and demanded she delete a video that never existed. Then, he had assigned her a 20-page apology essay. After that, he embarrassed her in class, and now he had deducted 4 points despite her genuinely trying to help. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. Eventually, her frustration boiled over. The glasses she had painstakingly repaired so she could return them to him, the same glasses that were causing him so much trouble, were suddenly tossed straight into the trash. Declaring that both Wuhan and his glasses belonged in a dumpster, she walked away without looking back. Yumi returns inside, where she runs into Dongju. Noticing her gloomy expression, he asks what is wrong. Yumi admits that her homeroom teacher seems to dislike her. Dongju immediately guesses that she is talking about Wuhan and asks why she thinks that. Yumi explains that ever since he mistakenly believed she was recording him, he has treated her badly. Dongju refuses to believe it. According to him, that simply does not sound like Wuhan. Yumi then begins listing every single thing Wuhan has done to her. However, Dongju remains unconvinced. He insists that Wuhan would never harass someone without a reason, and that there must be another explanation. Hearing this, Yumi realizes that Dongju will never speak badly about his friend, and probably will not believe her no matter what evidence she presents. Disappointed, she gives up and leaves. Later, Yumi begins thinking about her novel again and reviews where she left off. After rereading the first episode, she decides that the ending still feels incomplete. Something is missing. Then inspiration strikes. Why not have Zhang beat up Wuhan? In her opinion, Wuhan deserves it anyway. With renewed enthusiasm, she starts rewriting the scene. In the updated version of her story, after Wuhan takes Dongju away, Zhang sneaks up behind him and delivers a powerful punch. Wuhan gets back up and tries to act cool, arrogantly claiming that he will deal with Zhang later. However, Yumi still feels unsatisfied. She decides that one punch is not nearly enough. So, as the all-powerful author of the story, she practically orders Zhang to hit him again. Suddenly, Wuhan begins looking nervous, while Zhang becomes delighted by this unexpected opportunity. He lands another massive punch, leaving Wuhan badly hurt. Dongju watches everything in shock. Meanwhile, Yumi sits back and proudly declares that now the episode finally feels complete. Justice, according to her imagination, has been served. Even after improving the chapter, however, she remains uncertain about publishing it. She wonders whether she should make it public at all. To her surprise, the characters inside her imagination begin begging her to post it. They excitedly ask whether they will finally get a chance to enter the real world. Yumi asks if they truly want that, and all three eagerly say yes. They continue pleading until she finally gives in. After a great deal of thought, she publishes episode 1 and decides to leave the consequences to fate. Besides, she genuinely believes she has written an excellent story this time. In her imagination, the three characters celebrate excitedly, convinced that they are finally on their way to the real world. The story then shifts to Wuhan's house. His headache is still bothering him, and Dongju notices his condition. Concerned, he asks whether the pain has become worse. Wuhan admits that it has, but insists that he will eventually recover. Zhang, meanwhile, cannot understand why anyone would bother stealing Wuhan's glasses in the first place. Zhang eventually tells Wuhan that he should simply get a new pair of glasses. Dongju quickly explains that these were special glasses that could not be replaced so easily. Shortly afterward, Wuhan gets up and attempts to continue working. Unfortunately, his headache only grows worse, making it nearly impossible for him to focus on anything. The following day, Wuhan's condition deteriorates even further. He is vomiting because the pain has become significantly worse. Seeing this, Dongju tells him not to worry and offers to inform the school that he is too sick to attend. Even Zhang and Daju begin feeling genuinely concerned. Watching Wuhan struggle so badly, they worry that he might seriously damage his health if things continue this way. The next day at school, Dongju enters Yumi's classroom and informs everyone that Wuhan will not be coming in because he is unwell. Therefore, he will be taking over the class instead. Goya is immediately thrilled by this news and openly wishes that every morning could begin with teacher Dongju's face. Yumi, on the other hand, becomes thoughtful. She cannot help wondering what exactly happened to Wuhan that was serious enough to keep him away from school. Later, the girls begin discussing the situation among themselves. Some speculate that Wuhan is secretly meeting his girlfriend and merely pretending to be sick, arguing that he seemed perfectly fine the previous day. Goya bluntly states that she does not feel sorry for him at all since he deducted points from her friend. To her, his illness feels like karma. A little later, as the girls pass by the classroom, Yumi notices Hasu smiling while talking to Wuhan on the phone. Curious, she secretly listens to the conversation. From what she hears, she quickly realizes that Wuhan is genuinely sick and not pretending. After ending the call, Hasu notices Yumi standing nearby. Without saying a word, she makes an annoyed face and walks away. Back in class, Yumi finds herself thinking about Wuhan repeatedly. She wonders what exactly is wrong with him and whether the missing glasses might somehow be responsible. Then she quickly tells herself that it is none of her business and tries to stop caring. Unfortunately, her conscience appears to disagree. Later, when she visits the teacher's office, she notices Zhang and Dongju printing missing glasses posters. As they work, they discuss Wuhan's worsening condition. They explain that there has been no improvement at all and that the doctor has warned them the situation could become serious. If things continue this way, even his other eye could potentially be at risk. Hearing this immediately catches Yumi's attention. She approaches them and nervously asks whether those glasses were really that important. Dongju then explained the entire situation to Wuhan in detail. As she listened, the color drained from her face. She immediately rushed away, replaying Dongju's words over and over in her mind. He had explained that those glasses had been specially designed for Wuhan and that he could barely function without them. To make matters worse, it would take a full 2 weeks for a replacement pair to be made. Realizing all of this, Yumi was completely overwhelmed with guilt. She hurried toward the dumpster where she had thrown the glasses away, only to discover that the garbage had already been collected. The trash was gone. Dongju finally told Yumi everything, and the moment she heard it, she rushed out of there in a panic. On her way, his words kept replaying in her mind, how those glasses had been made especially for Wuhan, how he couldn't manage without them, and how getting a new pair made would take a full 2 weeks. By now, guilt had completely taken over Yumi, but when she reached the dustbin, she discovered that the garbage had been hauled away just moments ago, so she took off running after the truck. Along the way, she stopped a girl, borrowed her bicycle, and got herself ready for the chase. After that, she pedaled like someone who'd lost her mind, trying with everything she had to get the truck to stop, pleading for it to halt because someone's life depended on it. But the truck simply wouldn't stop, and quite a bit of time passed with Yumi chasing it on the bicycle. Still, somehow she managed to get it to pull over, and she began begging the driver to let her pull her things out of the garbage, or else her teacher would die. The man asked what nonsense she was going on about. She insisted he listen to her, explaining that her teacher's glasses were in that garbage, that they mattered enormously to him, and that if she didn't find them today, her teacher would surely die. Then the scene cuts, and now we're shown Yumi digging through the trash for the glasses. The man was helping her too, and he asked why on earth she'd thrown her teacher's glasses away in the first place, and if she'd thrown them out, why she was now searching for them. Through her tears, she said there was no point in explaining it all now, because even she hadn't known those glasses would turn out to be so important. But after a long search, Yumi finally found Wuhan's glasses. The sight made her so happy that she burst into tears again. She'd actually found them, and now teacher Wuhan wouldn't die. The man let out a sigh of relief too. The same night, Yumi's brother Yudo comes to return the glasses to Wuhan. He claimed he'd found them lying somewhere, and since Wuhan had put up a poster about them, he wanted the prize money. At first, Wuhan breathed easy, seeing his glasses back, but then he pointed out to Yudo that his phone number had the exact same digits as one of his students has. Here we see that Wuhan had already noticed earlier that Yumi's number also ended with the same digits. Hearing all this, Yudo froze and even tried to deny it, claiming he didn't know any Yumi. But when Wuhan told him to call her, Yudo had no choice. He dialed Yumi's number and handed the phone to Wuhan, who said he knew she was nearby and told her to come out. And then we're shown that Yumi really had been hiding right there. Once Yumi had explained the whole story, Yudo started mocking his sister for being such a fool. Wuhan scolded him for it, told him to show his elders some respect, and ordered him to leave. After Yudo was gone, Yumi just kept tearfully apologizing. Wuhan reminded her that he'd told her earlier to just admit it if she'd broken the glasses, but she said nothing. Crying, she confessed she'd been scared, afraid he'd dock her points again because it felt to her like he didn't like her. That was why, even today, he deducted 4 points over her friend Jia. Wuhan watched her quietly as she kept insisting she truly hadn't known how important the glasses were to him. Seeing the state she was in, Wuhan understood that she really had worked hard to recover them and genuinely regretted her mistake. A small smile crept onto his face because Yumi had done so much for the sake of his glasses, and so he forgave her. As the two of them were heading home, he told her that she had admitted her mistake. Sure, but the matter of repayment still remained. Yumi asked what repayment he meant. He explained that the glasses had been worth 10 million, a value now reduced to 0, and since he couldn't take money from his own student, she'd have to make it up some other way. Yumi was floored. 10 million was an enormous sum, something she truly couldn't pay, so she said she was ready to do whatever he asked instead. He told her she'd take extra math classes, fix the AC temperature before he arrived, collect the homework, clean the classroom after school, and lock it up too. Yumi grew even more stunned. How was she supposed to manage all these tasks? And even if she did manage the rest, how could she take extra math classes when those were only for the top students? Wuhan replied that she needed to score well. That only flustered Yumi more, because that was exactly when her extra PT class would be. She couldn't turn down Zhang. He had high hopes for her, so she begged Wuhan to understand her situation, saying she just wouldn't be able to do it. But Wuhan reminded her once again not to forget about that 10 million, and told her to do exactly as he said. Then he stepped past her and went into his house, leaving poor Yumi standing there in tears, wondering why she'd ever broken this tyrant's glasses, now that she was trapped in such a mess. Now Yumi, worn out and defeated, returned to her room. Yudo showed up, demanding money as her teacher hadn't given him anything, so she'd have to pay up instead. At first, Yumi refused, saying she really had no money, that even her pocket money was gone. But when she saw Yudo start calling out for their mom, she handed over whatever little cash she had left and shooed him out of the room. Then she broke down crying again, wondering why her brother had to know her secret at all and how much he blackmailed her with it. That was when Wuhan's words came back to her, how he talked about a loss of 10 million that simply had to be repaid. And it hit Yumi that lines like these could be turned into excellent dialogue. So thrilled, she sat down to write episode 2. But just then, she noticed her novel had racked up a huge number of likes. It sent her head spinning. She wondered if maybe this was someone else's account, so she checked carefully. But the account really was hers, and the novel she'd written about teachers had pulled in this many likes. On top of that, comments were pouring in about how interesting the story was, that it was definitely going to be a hit, and that plenty of people were already waiting for episode 2. At first, the shock made Yumi sink to the floor, but then a wave of happiness washed over her. She'd actually pulled it off. People were finally enjoying her novel. Where before she'd get only 1 or 2 views, now there were a full 15,000 likes along with loads of comments. So after dancing to her heart's content, she sat down with full energy to write episode 2. She was writing the dialogue with such focus that she didn't even register her friends calling her to chat on her phone or the many messages they were sending. None of it reached her, because Yumi's attention was now fixed solely on crafting a powerful episode 2. And now episode 2 of the novel has started. When Dongju came home late, Jiyoung started questioning him about where he'd been, complaining that he'd been waiting forever, and then began teasing Dongju. Dongju pushed Jong away from himself, but in doing so, Jong's lip got hurt. So Dongju apologized profusely, saying he hadn't done it on purpose. But Jong told him that now that he'd admitted his mistake, he'd have to make up for it, and that meant a full 10 million won, the price of his delicate lips. Dongju repeated it in disbelief, but Jong replied that every single part of his body was precious, that no one even had the courage to touch it. Then, running his hand over Dongju's body, he said that since Dongju was poor, he'd have to pay the price in a different way. Drawing close, he told Dongju to meet him at his house on Wednesday at exactly 5 o'clock, not a minute late, because he didn't want to suffer any longer. Dongju stared at Jong in astonishment, and then episode 2 ended. The next day, Dongju asked Wuhan why he was troubling Yumi so much. He'd found her looking sad, and she thought Wuhan hated her because of that whole video recording misunderstanding. Wuhan replied that it was nothing like that. He knew perfectly well that Yumi hadn't recorded any video that day. So Dongju asked, then why was he troubling her? Wuhan said he couldn't stand the thought of how Yumi could possibly score a 4 in math. Dongju couldn't make sense of what Wuhan meant. Just then, Jong came over and announced that 4 students had agreed to join his after-school program, and now he just needed 1 more. Dongju mentioned that Wuhan had already signed up 10 students. Hearing this, Jong grew jealous while Wuhan was preening with pride. Then Jong remarked, "Oh wow, had Wuhan gotten his glasses back?" At that point, Daju, overhearing, came over too, asking whether the glasses had really turned up, who had returned them, and whether Wuhan had given that person a reward, and if so, how much money. Wuhan asked why on earth he'd give a reward. Dongju then explained that according to Wuhan, the person who'd returned the glasses had refused to take any money. Jong mocked Wuhan by saying that he should fall at that person's feet, otherwise the pigeon would poop on him again. Hearing all this, Wuhan seethed in anger, but endured the two of them and said nothing. Meanwhile, Yumi arrives at school, happily reading the comments on episode 2. She was thrilled at how her novel was being loved. People were even floating ideas about what would happen next, and remarking on how awesome the chemistry between the 3 characters looked. Just then, Goya came over and asked Yumi what she was looking at to make her so happy. Yumi said everyone really liked the new story she'd written. Goya said, "Oh, is that so? Then show me too." But as always, Yumi refused. So Goya asked whether she happened to write adult stories. Flustered, Yumi said no. Goya then asked whether she wrote BL stories. Yumi grew even more alarmed and nervously said, "No, that wasn't it." From Goya's remarks, Yumi gathered that Goya didn't care for BL stories, so she stayed all the more silent so Goya wouldn't catch on to anything. After that, Yumi arrives at the teacher's office with a form, telling herself that her father had said whenever you stand at a fork in the road, there's always merit in choosing the harder path. Jong grew very happy at the sight of Yumi because now he'd have a full 5 students to make his team. But Yumi apologized to Jong and walked past him, handing Wuhan her form for his extra class instead. Jong was stunned. Yumi explained, "Sorry, sir, she truly wanted to join his team from the heart, but because of a certain someone she couldn't." Jong then said angrily that if the math teacher was blackmailing her, she should blink twice. Yumi started blinking non-stop, signaling how badly she was being trapped. Wuhan then said that she herself wanted to improve her math scores, which was why she was coming to his extra class, and he could hardly turn her away. Jong countered that Wuhan didn't know how good she was at running, but Wuhan said she didn't strike him as the athlete type. One look at her face made it plain how lazy she was. Yumi bristled, asking if she looked lazy to him, when he had no idea how quick and nimble she was. So he asked her how many hours a day she slept. With her head bowed, Yumi admitted 10 hours. At that, Jong gave up, telling her fine, never mind, she should listen to her teacher, since he was only speaking for her own good. Wuhan was delighted because he'd proved right in front of Jong that Yumi really was lazy. Yumi, meanwhile, was furious with Wuhan for humiliating her everywhere, even in front of all the teachers. She vowed that one day she truly wouldn't let him off the hook. In the next scene, we see Dongju teaching the students poetry, with Goya, as always, just staring at him. But then she noticed that Dongju wasn't using the gift she'd given him. This made her sad. After class, Goya asked Yumi why teacher Dongju wasn't using her gift. Yumi said maybe he wanted something else, so Goya shouldn't dwell on it so much. Goya replied that she'd brought that gift with such love. Then she said that when she turned 20, she'd propose to teacher Dongju. Yumi pointed out that by then she'd have fallen for someone else, since Goya couldn't stay interested in anyone for more than 200 days. Goya insisted that wasn't true. Teacher Dongju would always remain in her heart now. Yumi asked what else she liked about him besides his face. Goya thought back to how looking into Dongju's eyes filled her with pity. There was pity brimming in those eyes. So she said she pitied him, and that was why she liked him so much. Hearing this, Yumi began to share that her own mother had pitied her father too, which was why she'd married him, but now her mother taught her never to marry a boy you pity, or your life would be ruined. Then she went quiet, because Goya was taking all of this badly. So Yumi said that Goya should go ahead and propose to Dongju, and that she was with her in this decision. After their lunch break, Wuhan comes in and starts teaching. Looking at his face, Yumi remarked to herself, who on earth could pity this one? As the class wrapped up, Wuhan left after telling Yumi that her points were in the negative, so she'd better remember to clean up. Irritated, Yumi said she didn't know about pity, but the sight of him always made her blood boil. Goya agreed too, saying this math teacher really was arrogant, forever tormenting Yumi. Just then, Jenny came over and said she wanted to try one particular thing in Korea with all of them, and they should just set aside the time. They all excitedly asked what that thing was. She just laughed, and then the scene cut, showing Yumi busy cleaning when she spotted Jong. She drew closer to keep watching him and said how nice it would be if she were in Jong Sir's class, how much fun it would be, and how engaged she'd stay. But their fate, it seemed, was written only to watch each other from afar, and all of it was thanks to that arrogant Wuhan. Looking at Yumi, Jong asked whether she had something she wanted to talk to him about. Did she want to file a complaint about Wuhan? Yumi said no. Then she began helping Jong, even though he kept refusing the help. From their conversation, it came out that Jong had wanted to become a national athlete, but an injury to his leg had shattered that dream, which was why he was now a teacher. Otherwise, he'd have been doing far better things in his life. Yumi mentioned that yes, she'd read about this in the newspaper back when the incident happened, and she began to feel sorry for Jong. Just then, a call came from Wuhan, who first asked where she was, then told her to grab the printer and get to the extra class before he arrived. Yumi said he could give the paper printing job to Hasu instead. In fact, Hasu would be thrilled to do it, but he told her that since she was the monitor, she'd be the one doing it. Yumi was baffled, wondering when on earth she'd become the monitor. She said bye to Jong and left, and when she came to the class with the printed papers, she saw that all the top students were sitting there. The sight of them made Yumi feel uncomfortable. She handed everyone their papers, and Hasu asked in surprise what she was doing there. Surely she'd just come to drop off the papers. Yumi told her no, she'd come to take the class too, and that Wuhan had told her to do so. This irritated Hasu even more. Why had Wuhan Sir called this girl into their extra class? It was an insult to the top students that she'd now be sitting among them. Then, once Yumi had moved on to hand out more papers, Hasu's friends said to let her be. Wuhan had probably hired her to pass out papers, since these little chores needed some idle person to do them anyway. That cheered Hasu up. She then started telling everyone that this girl, Yumi, had scored only a 4 in math. Hasu's friend laughed, and Yumi kept glancing back at all of them, seeing how she was being mocked over that 4, which made her feel all the more uncomfortable. For the moment, she set the room's temperature the way Wuhan liked it and finished all the tasks he'd assigned, but she had absolutely no desire to stay there any longer. So, watching for her chance, she slipped away quietly, feeling quite low from Hasu's words, and just then, she ran straight into Wuhan, who understood that she was running off to skip the extra class. Wuhan asked where she was going. She replied, couldn't she please just go home since all the topper students were sitting in the class? What was she supposed to do among them all? Her cousin and her tuition teacher had once told her that math wasn't her thing, and they'd been absolutely right, because numbers made no sense to her at all. The moment she looked at them, her head started spinning. In every other subject she'd gotten by through rote memorization, but with math alone she just couldn't do that. Wuhan said, oh, is that so? Then how had she managed to score that 4? Had she just guessed? She said no, she'd actually solved the problems. And now we're shown Yumi taking a long time to solve each question one by one in a way that involves a great deal of calculation. But even so, her method was perfectly correct. It might take time, but her answer always came out exactly right. Hearing this, Wuhan said, see, he'd known she could do math, because the great names in math had also spent years solving sums this same way, calculating step by step. Math only required dedication, and that dedication was inside her. So now she should come with him, and with that he forcibly took Yumi along into the class. But Yumi's mind wasn't on her studies at all. She was fretting over the mess she'd landed herself in when she noticed Hasu putting on lipstick in the middle of class. Astonished, Yumi wondered what she'd just witnessed. Why was Hasu doing this? Then she looked at Wuhan, and it all became clear that Hasu had a crush on the math teacher. It made sense. Wuhan was a grump, and the one who liked him was a supreme grump, too. But what did any of this matter to her? Maybe she'd just take a little nap. But right then, Wuhan made Yumi stand up and asked angrily what was happening with episode 3, when was she going to post it? At first, Yumi was startled, but now, since everyone was looking at her, she launched into an explanation that episode 3 was going to be quite powerful. When the innocent Dongju went to Zhong's house, the cruel Zhong would torment him. He'd tell Dongju that he was making him suffer and wouldn't even help him with math, that he was always off with that grump Wuhan. What did Wuhan have that he didn't? Yumi was delivering the dialogue with full emotion, and Wuhan and the whole class were taking interest in it. But then it turned out this had all been just a dream. And by now the whole class was over too, and Wuhan was the one waking Yumi up. She was stunned. Wuhan told her he wanted homework on everything he'd taught today due tomorrow, and then he left. Yumi was left protesting to herself, wondering how she'd ever manage all this work. Late at night, Yumi heads somewhere, following a location. Actually, when Jenny had said she wanted to try something in Korea, what she'd meant was a night party. So Yumi arrived at Jenny's location, where everyone had already gathered for the party. Yumi was happy to see them all and apologized for being late because of the extra class. She'd also brought a welcome gift for Jenny, which Jenny liked a great deal. Meanwhile, everyone else started insisting why hadn't she brought a gift for them. So she showed them all that she'd brought sweet potatoes for everyone. Seeing this, they grew even happier and started patting their stomachs, saying, "Wait, let them make some room in there to eat all this too." Yumi asked Jenny to come along with her. Then the two of them went outside and started roasting the sweet potatoes, quite happy. Yumi asked whether Jenny had read the novel My Love from Paris. Jenny said yes, it was her favorite novel. So Yumi said that in it too, a girl falls in love with a Brazilian, just like Jenny's own love story. Jenny grew a little hesitant because she'd lied about having a boyfriend, and asked whether Yumi had already figured out that she'd lied. Yumi said yes, but never mind, they could imagine themselves as characters in a novel, and there was nothing wrong with that. So Jenny admitted that she had no boyfriend. She just loved this novel's story so much that she stayed lost in it. Otherwise, she'd thought claiming a boyfriend would make her seem cool, which was why she'd said it. Yumi told her it was fine. These things happen. Then she began to share that she too was quite fond of novels, and there she fell silent because she didn't want to tell Jenny about her favorite BL novels, so she steered the conversation elsewhere. Jenny got busy with other topics too, but she'd made Yumi promise not to tell anyone that she didn't have a boyfriend. All of them enjoyed the sweet potatoes together, which they loved. And finally, worn out, they lay down, saying they'd really enjoyed themselves today. One of them said that the math teacher claimed they were all stars. Then another said that, well, she actually found that grump pretty wonderful, and now as she gazed up at the sky, it felt as if he were up there too. But when Yumi looked at the sky and saw Wuhan there, he rudely asked her whether she'd finished her homework. The sight made her sit up at once, flustered. No, how could she have forgotten that she still had her math homework to do? And if she didn't do it, that grump would have her head. Then she grumbled that she hadn't done the math homework, that she'd come late because of the extra class and hadn't even gotten to enjoy herself. Goya advised her to just do the homework, or that Wuhan would curse her out with his eyes like last time. But too much time had already passed, so Yumi didn't manage to do the homework. The next day she came to school and told Wuhan sorry as she hadn't been able to do the homework. So could she instead write out one solution 10 times? This made him angry, and he asked whether she'd at least tried to solve the sums. Couldn't she have attempted even one? Yumi said what good was trying when she simply didn't understand it. Doing that would just be pointless. So Wuhan asked her whether she remembered what he'd said on the first day of school about what math was. Yumi thought hard, very hard, then said the world. And as Wuhan stared at her, she started guessing wildly, UFO rocket. So Wuhan said, never mind that, just tell him what he'd explained to her in the office. But Yumi didn't remember that either. So Wuhan said he'd told her from the very start that math has to be understood. It doesn't just come to you on its own. Yumi said, oh yes, he had said something like that. Sorry, she'd forgotten. So Wuhan told her never once listened to him carefully and wasn't listening now either. While he'd been hoping she'd at least try to solve a single sum, but maybe nothing would ever come of her. She'd disappointed him, and then he quietly went back to his work. Yumi stood there in silence. realizing that this time she'd genuinely made Wuhan sad. Then she apologized to him and quietly left too. But once outside, she got irritated, wondering what expectations he'd even had of her that she'd disappointed him. She hadn't asked him to chase after her, and now he'd ruined her whole mood. But never mind, she'd gotten some good dialogue for the next episode. So she went to the library and, with renewed focus, sat down to write the episode once again. At first, she just read the comments and grew happy at how crazy people were going for her novel. Then she wrote the next episode with full focus, recalling all the lines Wuhan had been saying. She set up a scene where Wuhan had found out that Dongju might go to Zhong's house. So while teaching Dongju, Wuhan was scolding him a great deal, telling him he was heartless, that nothing would ever come of him, that he'd disappointed him. Had Zhong called him again today? Was he summoning him again? Dongju told him to be quiet and let him study, but Wuhan didn't let Dongju study. Instead, he began staking his claim over him, saying that sometimes he felt like pulling Dongju close and never letting him go anywhere, kissing him in a way that left him breathless, his breath mingling into his own. The scent of his own body and the scent of Dongju's body both made him restless. He felt like devouring him and never parting from him. Yumi was writing all these lines with great interest, and beyond these she wrote several other dirty lines too. Today she made some especially bold scenes. Then at the end she said, "Now there's the fun." An episode's ending should be the kind that leaves everyone going crazy for the next one. But just as she was reveling in her happiness, she said, "Why does this scent seem so familiar?" This wasn't the library's scent. It belonged to a certain person whose anger sat right at the tip of his nose. But who was that person? Then, suddenly stricken, she said this scent smelled like the math teacher. No, this couldn't be happening. She wished it were a dream or just her imagination. Then, when she fearfully turned to look behind her, the ground slipped out from under her feet because Wuhan really was standing there and he had already read everything Yumi had written. Yumi quickly tried to shut the laptop, but he stopped her, swiftly moved her off the seat, and told her not to move an inch. Then he began reading the novel, and reading it left him stunned too. What kind of disgraceful stuff had she been writing? Yumi just stood there in silence. Now we see that quite a while has passed, and Wuhan is still reading the novel from episode 1 all the way to the end. Meanwhile, Yumi felt her life draining out of her. No, this couldn't be happening. In fact, why was it happening at all? Where could she go now? Where could she go to hide her face? Should she just die? And God, if you had to get me caught, you could have gotten me caught by someone else's hands. Why Wuhan's hands of all people? Now he'd tell everyone about her bold exploits. But wait a minute, why was he reading it so attentively? Was he enjoying it? Then Wuhan asked whether she'd said something. She said no, and then she turned to face the other way, and Wuhan went back to reading every single line of the novel carefully. Yumi again said, "Oh, enough, just skim the top. Why was he going so deep? Now surely chew her up alive." After reading the whole novel, Wuhan called out to Yumi and asked what all of this even was. Yumi said, "Sir, she had no idea either. In fact, she herself had been shocked that anyone could write something so filthy. She didn't know who'd written all this, because when she'd come here too, she'd found the laptop lying open." So Wuhan said, "Oh, is that so? She hadn't written it." Yumi said no, she swore on him that she truly hadn't written it. So Wuhan said that meant she'd tell 1,000 lies to hide one, and feel no shame that even after he'd caught her red-handed, she was still denying it. And then, describing the novel's characters, he said it had an innocent, naive student named Dongju, and the arrogant scoundrel who's a math genius. That was him, wasn't it? And the boy proud of his own strength was Zhong. And the one who'd come from Japan and was excessively rich was Daju, right? And yet she was claiming she knew nothing about it, and on top of that, swearing a false oath on him. Yumi panicked, saying she truly knew nothing. So Wuhan began reciting all the dialogue that Yumi had heard from him and written into her novel, especially the 10 million won line, which couldn't possibly belong to anyone but Wuhan. So Wuhan said there are limits, but she'd crossed every limit and still wasn't ready to accept her mistake. Then finally, Yumi admitted her mistake and, apologizing, said what was she supposed to do. The chemistry between the four of them was so good that she couldn't control her imagination. Naturally, his first demand was simple, delete it immediately, but Yumi flatly refused. No matter how sternly he spoke, she shook her head and insisted that she could never erase it. Wuhan, however, wasn't willing to let the matter go so easily. In his eyes, students who wrote such indecent things about their teachers did not deserve forgiveness. Since she refused to delete the novel herself, he decided he would do it personally. The moment he reached for the laptop, Yumi shoved him away and slammed it shut. Through her tears, she promised that she would focus on her studies from now on. She would even learn mathematics properly if that was what he wanted. She begged him to forgive her, saying that even a dying person's final wish was usually granted. Surely he could show mercy to one helpless student. For the first time, Wuhan simply watched her in silence. There was something almost sympathetic in his gaze. He could see how deeply attached she was to her work and how serious she was about protecting it. Meanwhile, Yumi continued crying and promised that she would do anything he asked, except deleting the novel. 30 full minutes passed like that. Eventually, Yumi became exhausted from crying. At the same time, she couldn't help wondering why this stubborn man refused to soften even a little. Only then did Wuhan finally speak. Since she had finished crying and still refused to delete the novel, she would need to bring her parents to school the next day. Not just her parents, all the teachers and perhaps even the entire school should hear about her little masterpiece. The announcement terrified Yumi. She immediately protested, insisting that she couldn't possibly do that. Her mother would kill her. Wuhan responded coldly, asking why she would do something she couldn't even admit to others. Then he gave her two options. Either she brought her parents to school the next day, or the novel had to be deleted before then. After delivering the ultimatum, he stood up and walked away, leaving Yumi frozen in shock. The moment he disappeared, her legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed and started crying all over again. Later, when she finally returned home, her mother cheerfully informed her that her favorite meal had been prepared. Normally, Yumi would have been thrilled, but now she had no appetite whatsoever. She declined the food immediately. Once alone, her anxiety grew even worse. No matter how much she thought about it, deleting the novel was impossible. But if everyone discovered the contents of her adult fantasies, the consequences would be disastrous. Meanwhile, Jong and Dongju were casually watching television that evening when Wuhan returned home. The sight of the two sitting close together instantly triggered memories of Yumi's novel. Scenes from her story replayed inside his head, showing Jong bothering Dongju and moving far too close in an obviously romantic way. For a brief moment, Wuhan stood there in stunned disbelief, wondering why such thoughts were even occurring to him. Then he suddenly snapped at them, ordering them to sit farther apart. He demanded to know why they were practically glued together. Both men were startled and couldn't understand what had gotten into him. As Wuhan turned to leave, he overheard another conversation. Jong was begging Dongju for one more round because he couldn't wait any longer. In reality, they were talking about another round of a game, but Wuhan's mind had already been poisoned by Yumi's imagination. A little later, Daju arrived and enthusiastically announced that he wanted to join in as well. The three prepared to play together, but Wuhan immediately interrupted again. Whether it was one round or two, he declared that the three of them weren't doing anything together. After barking another order for them to stay apart, he stormed off, leaving all three completely baffled. Back in his room, Wuhan was disgusted with himself. He wondered why his thoughts had become so dirty all of a sudden. Why was he looking at his own friends with suspicion? Disturbed by his reaction, he ended up searching information about boys' love novels on the internet. Meanwhile, Yumi had already been arrested for writing such scandalous stories. Her friends appeared one after another, confronting her. Then her mother appeared in the fantasy as well, furious and humiliated. She accused Yumi of ruining the family's reputation by writing filthy stories. The nightmare only became worse from there. Yumi imagined herself trapped inside a car with her teachers, while each of them took turns criticizing her. The pressure became so overwhelming that Yumi grabbed her head in despair. The nightmare escalated further. Then, the four teachers appeared together and dragged her away. To her horror, they intended to cut off the hand she used for typing. Just when things couldn't get any worse, Wuhan stepped forward. In her imagination, he personally cut off her hand. Yumi screamed at the top of her lungs and suddenly woke up. It had all been a dream. Unfortunately, waking up didn't solve anything. Wuhan's words still echoed inside her mind. The same question kept repeating over and over. What should I do now? She couldn't sleep peacefully. She felt trapped in a state of constant depression and anxiety. At the same time, Wuhan was examining the character profiles from Yumi's novel. The details she had written about him left him completely speechless. According to the novel, he was a mathematical genius, arrogant, prideful, and preferred living in dark rooms. The lights in his house were usually off. Sometimes he liked wearing sexy clothes. He had no friends. His family didn't live with him, and he loved taking showers. Then came the detail that truly broke him. According to Yumi's novel, his house had a bathroom, but no toilet. Wuhan stared at the description in utter disbelief before blurting out the obvious question. Why on earth would his house not have a toilet? Meanwhile, Yumi had reached a point where frustration completely replaced fear. She started cursing Wuhan non-stop, calling him every insult she could think of, and accusing him of arriving at the school solely to ruin her life. Eventually, she began shouting his name at the top of her lungs, swearing that she would never let him get away with this. The next day, when Yumi arrived at school, she spotted Wuhan rushing past like a rocket. For a brief, glorious moment, she felt relieved. Maybe she had been saved after all. That hope lasted only seconds. The instant Wuhan noticed her, he turned around and came straight back. Then he told her to follow him. Once they sat down, he calmly asked the question he cared about most. Had she deleted the novel? Instead of answering directly, Yumi began telling him her story. She explained that she had been writing stories ever since she was in 8th grade. In the beginning, she would take plots from stories she loved and rearrange them into something new. But eventually, she started creating stories entirely on her own. Wuhan listened to Yumi's explanation with an expression that suggested he was rapidly losing faith in humanity. Unaware of the damage she was causing, Yumi enthusiastically continued her story. She explained about her journey, and Wuhan looked confused by her use of the term mass release. She proudly explained that it meant uploading 2 episodes at the same time. According to her, new writers often gained attention by releasing chapters quickly in the beginning. Unfortunately, there was no success for her. As she continued speaking, her voice gradually became more emotional. She explained that before she discovered writing, her life had felt dark and empty. She always felt like a disappointment. However, everything changed when she started getting lost in her imagination and creating stories of her own. Writing gave her a world that belonged entirely to her, a place where she felt happy, accomplished, and proud of herself. And now, according to her dramatic interpretation of events, Wuhan was attempting to rip away the single ray of hope that illuminated her otherwise miserable existence. Eventually, Wuhan raised a hand and interrupted her before the speech could evolve into a full-length documentary. Looking genuinely concerned, he asked whether something was wrong with her or if there was still more left in this emotional monologue. Yumi immediately replied that she was finished and simply wanted him to try understanding the story from her perspective. That, however, prompted Wuhan to ask a question she clearly hadn't considered. Has she ever attempted to understand the situation from his perspective? If he wrote a similar story about her and her friends and published it for thousands of strangers to read, wouldn't she be upset too? For once, Yumi couldn't argue. She admitted that she had made a mistake and promised she would never do something like that again. However, she begged him to let her finish the novel first. After all, the story had already accumulated 20,000 likes, and countless readers were eagerly waiting for the next chapter. To her, deleting the novel now would be like abandoning a child halfway through raising it. Unfortunately, Wuhan remained completely unmoved. Yumi immediately revised her theory. Perhaps he was upset because she had included romantic scenes. After all, touching each other was also a natural expression of affection. Once again, Wuhan shook his head. That wasn't the problem either. Yumi then tried a third explanation and concluded that he must be offended because she had used teachers as characters in the novel. She readily admitted that doing so had been inappropriate and sincerely apologized for it. At that point, Wuhan looked so frustrated that it seemed physically painful. He couldn't believe that after everything, she still hadn't figured out what had actually upset him. When Yumi honestly admitted that she genuinely had no idea, Wuhan finally decided to explain it himself. Leaning forward, he demanded to know how such a tragedy had occurred, why it had occurred, and most importantly, how she had allowed it to occur in the first place. Yumi waited nervously, expecting some serious complaint about privacy, reputation, or ethics. Instead, Wuhan revealed the true source of his outrage. The hero of the story wasn't him. It was someone else. Yumi stared at him in complete disbelief, while her brain desperately tried to process what she had just heard. Wuhan then elaborated on his suffering. Once Zhang and Yongju ended up together, what role was left for him? Was he supposed to remain single for the entire story? Was he expected to watch everyone else find happiness while he wandered around the plot alone until the end? Yumi's expression became increasingly blank as she attempted to understand whether this conversation was real. After a long pause, she carefully reminded him that he was technically a secondary character. The moment those words left her mouth, she accidentally stepped on a landmine. Wuhan looked personally offended by the concept. Secondary? He had never been second in anything his entire life. Not once. He had always been first. Yet somehow, in Yumi's fictional universe, she had reduced him to a secondary character. The sheer audacity of it seemed to wound him on a spiritual level. Yumi sat frozen while Wuhan delivered his solution. If she didn't want to delete the novel, then she would simply have to rewrite it. This time, he would be the protagonist, not Zhang. He wanted to be the main character of the story. Yumi felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. The man standing in front of her was not demanding justice, compensation, or even an apology. He was demanding a promotion within a fictional BL novel. When she stared at him in disbelief, Wuhan calmly confirmed that if the protagonist was a stubborn romantic lead, then he would gladly accept the role. After spending several moments questioning reality itself, Yumi explained that such a drastic change would destroy the entire plot structure. The story would fall apart. The character relationships would collapse. Everything she had built would be ruined. Wuhan responded with the confidence of a man who had absolutely no intention of solving those problems himself. If the story fell apart, she could simply put it back together. From this point onward, he would be the hero. Furthermore, every chapter would have to pass through him before publication. He would personally read and approve each episode before it went online. That announcement nearly gave Yumi a heart attack. Just as she was trying to recover from the emotional damage, Dongju sent Wuhan a message, prompting him to stand up and leave. Before walking away, Wuhan gave her a final ultimatum. From now on, she would either write under his supervision or prepare herself to delete her beloved masterpiece forever. The choice was entirely hers. Yumi spent a long time silently considering her options before finally surrendering. Through gritted teeth, she agreed to continue writing under his supervision. The moment she gave her answer, Wuhan looked remarkably pleased with himself and headed for the exit. Yumi immediately prepared a fresh collection of insults for him, but before she could unleash them, he suddenly returned because he had forgotten his cup. She barely managed to stop herself in time. After he finally left for real, Yumi sat there in complete disbelief. This bizarre teacher wasn't upset that she had completely destroyed his dignity inside the novel. He wasn't angry about the absurd scenarios she had written. No, the thing that genuinely offended him was the fact that he wasn't the protagonist. In Yumi's opinion, her mathematics teacher was completely insane. The story then shifted to a new development at school. A famous television program from a highly popular channel had chosen the school as a filming location, and everyone was excited because the broadcast would significantly increase the school's reputation. When Wuhan arrived for the meeting, the principal warmly invited him to sit down and explained the plan. The 4 teachers would be featured while teaching students. According to her, simply having Wuhan appear on screen would already be enough. The only problem was his broken glasses, which would need to be dealt with somehow. Unfortunately, after reviewing the documents, Wuhan immediately rejected the proposal. He politely but firmly stated that he would not participate. The principal was stunned. She tried persuading him by explaining that every successful school broadcast required at least one handsome mathematics teacher, but even that argument failed. After apologizing, Wuhan simply left the room, leaving the principal visibly irritated. Sensing danger, Daju immediately stepped forward and promised that he would personally convince Wuhan to change his mind. After school, the 3 teachers sat together, looking completely defeated as they tried to figure out how they were supposed to persuade a man who treated stubbornness as a competitive sport. Daju pointed out that if Wuhan refused, the principal might become so angry that all 4 of them could end up suffering the consequences. After all, everyone had witnessed how upset she was. Meanwhile, the person causing all this trouble wasn't thinking about the television program at all. Wuhan was busy checking whether Yumi had uploaded the next chapter of her novel. That question occupied his thoughts so thoroughly that it became the perfect note on which the scene ended. So far, the three teachers remained deeply concerned because Wuhan had completely refused to participate in the school's upcoming television shoot. Determined to save the situation, Daju approached him and immediately began trying to butter him up. Unfortunately, the moment Wuhan saw him, he bluntly announced that he wasn't interested. Refusing to surrender, Daju reminded him that they had known each other since third grade and that he understood exactly what had happened in the past, the incident responsible for Wuhan's hatred of filming. Rather than being touched by this heartfelt appeal, Wuhan responded by telling him that if he already knew the reason, then he should stop bothering him and leave. The moment he disappeared, Wuhan switched screens and returned to the subject that truly concerned him. Why hadn't Yumi uploaded the next chapter yet? The answer, unfortunately, was panic. Yumi was suffering because she had no idea how to write bold romantic scenes anymore. The knowledge that Wuhan would eventually read everything completely ruined her concentration. Every time she tried imagining a scene, she immediately pictured Wuhan reviewing it with a judgmental expression, and her brain practically shut down. Desperate for encouragement, she opened the comments section. Instead of finding comfort, she discovered hundreds of readers demanding episode 4. Watching the pressure continue to build only made her more anxious. The following day, she arrived at school still thinking about the problem. She was so absorbed in wondering what to write next that she almost didn't notice Wuhan approaching. The moment he reached her, he asked why episode 4 still hadn't been released. He even reminded her that she used to do mass releases and upload multiple chapters at once. What happened? Yumi immediately started apologizing, but Wuhan wasn't interested in apologies. What he wanted was a good story. He advised her to look deeper into his character and find all the positive traits she had ignored. Then she should take those qualities and pour them into the relationship between his character and Dongju's character. Yumi reluctantly agreed to try. Satisfied with her answer, Wuhan finally left. The second he disappeared from sight, she resumed complaining about him and muttering that he had completely ruined her life. Later, the story shifted to Goya, who was discussing the upcoming television program with Yumi. Goya dramatically declared that she didn't want the entire world looking at her beloved teacher Dongju. Before the conversation could continue any further, however, Yumi spotted Wuhan approaching from a distance and immediately fled the area as though her survival instincts had activated automatically. Every few seconds, she felt as though Wuhan was approaching from somewhere nearby. At one point, she abruptly turned around after catching a glimpse of someone in the hallway, only to discover that it wasn't Wuhan at all, but another unfortunate teacher who had been mistaken for him. The moment she realized her error, she let out a sigh of relief. Unfortunately, that relief lasted only a few seconds because the actual Wuhan appeared shortly afterward. Yumi immediately fled back into the classroom. Sometime later, Wuhan entered the classroom and began teaching. Once the lesson ended, however, he immediately returned to his favorite hobby, lecturing Yumi about how her novel should portray his character. From a distance, Yumi's friends watched the entire scene with pity. In their eyes, the poor girl was enduring all of this because she had scored 4 marks in mathematics. Surely that had to be the reason. The math teacher seemed completely obsessed with her. There were plenty of students in the class who struggled with mathematics, yet somehow, Wuhan only ever targeted Yumi. Meanwhile, Wuhan continued explaining in great detail how his character should be written. Failure to do so, he warned, would have consequences. Eventually, Yumi sat down to begin writing episode 4. The story opened with Dongju arriving at Zhong's house. Looking around in amazement, Dongju couldn't stop staring at the luxurious residence and wondered how someone could live in such a massive place. Meanwhile, Zhong had clearly been waiting for him and immediately focused all of his attention on Dongju's arrival. When Dongju asked whether he lived there alone, Zhong completely ignored the question and instead demanded to know why Dongju had arrived so late. His suspicious mind quickly settled on a culprit. Surely Dongju had been spending time with Wuhan again. Dongju tried to deny it and explained that he had genuinely attempted to arrive earlier. Before he could finish, however, Zhong moved closer and cut him off. He reminded Dongju about the enormous debt hanging over his head and implied that excuses were no longer useful. Dongju attempted to reason with him, insisting that Zhong wasn't normally this kind of person and shouldn't behave this way. In response, Zhong revealed that he was no longer the same man who spent his life longing helplessly from a distance. According to him, he had evolved into something else entirely. He was now Dongju's dog. Wherever Dongju went, he would follow. He would stick to him constantly and prevent anyone else from getting close because from now on, Dongju belonged only to him. The dramatic declaration left Dongju thoroughly shocked. At the same time, there was a subtle implication that he had deliberately come to Zhong after becoming exhausted by Wuhan's relentless behavior. As all of this unfolded within the novel, the real Wuhan was sitting nearby reading episode 4 with complete concentration. Yumi, meanwhile, found herself becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Why was he reading her story so seriously? Eventually, she tried convincing herself that this arrangement was still better than deleting the novel altogether. A moment later, Wuhan beckoned her over with a finger. Yumi approached cautiously, already sensing disaster. The first question out of his mouth left her speechless. He wanted to know why the luxurious mansion belonged to Zhong. More specifically, why didn't it belong to him? Had she already forgotten everything he had explained? Yumi quickly assured him that she remembered perfectly well. She knew she was supposed to make him the main character now. That answer only made him more annoyed. If she remembered so well, then why had she made Zhong wealthier than him? Wuhan then launched into what could only be described as a hostile corporate takeover of someone else's fictional character. He instructed Yumi to transfer everything desirable from Zhong's character directly to his own. The wealth, the good qualities, the appealing traits, everything. She should emphasize his strengths, increase his screen time, and make him the clear star of the story. As for Zhong, his scenes should be reduced, trimmed, and eventually pushed into the background as a side character. Yumi stared at him with such fury that for a brief moment she appeared to be considering murder. When he noticed her hesitation, Wuhan simply ordered her to start making the corrections immediately. Yumi blinked in confusion and asked whether he meant right now. He calmly informed her that she had exactly 1 hour. Forced into submission once again, Yumi returned to writing. The story she began revising immediately transformed into something completely different. In the original version, Dongju and Zhong were together when Wuhan suddenly appeared and ordered Zhong to leave, claiming he had already seen enough of his overacting. Completely bewildered, Zhong stepped aside. Without wasting another second, Wuhan grabbed Dongju by the collar and demanded to know how he dared invite another man into his house while Wuhan still existed. The rewritten scene became increasingly ridiculous with every sentence. Wuhan declared that the house belonged to him and that Dongju belonged to him as well. If Dongju thought he would simply give up, then he was badly mistaken. From now on, Wuhan would follow him everywhere just like a loyal dog, and if Dongju so much as glanced at another man, there would be consequences. The entire speech sounded absurd enough that even Dongju eventually stopped the roleplay and turned toward Yumi. With complete sincerity, he apologized and informed her that something had clearly gone wrong with the story. Meanwhile, Yumi casually asked what exactly seemed wrong. Dongju looked genuinely confused and pointed out that all of those lines were supposed to belong to Zhong. Why was Wuhan saying them now? Why had the entire personality dynamic suddenly changed? Hearing this, Wuhan immediately became irritated and walked away with an offended expression while Yumi desperately tried to salvage the situation. She explained that the changes might seem strange at first, but eventually the story would find its rhythm and everything would make sense. Unfortunately, Dongju wasn't convinced. He pointed out a major flaw in the logic. If he ended up becoming Wuhan's boyfriend again, then when exactly would they make Wuhan regret his actions? The entire emotional payoff would disappear. There wouldn't even be a proper happy ending anymore. From his perspective, the story was drifting completely off course. Listening to him made Yumi even more stressed. Meanwhile, the man responsible for all this chaos was sitting comfortably nearby, listening to music and enjoying life with the confidence of a newly promoted protagonist. Snatching away his moment of peace, she paused his music and angrily informed him that trying to make him the hero was creating endless problems. She was being interrogated by her own characters while he sat there enjoying music as though none of this concerned him. Wuhan responded by staring at her for a moment. Then, rather than answering, he simply ignored her and resumed whatever bizarre protagonist training exercise he had been doing. That only made Yumi angrier. Nevertheless, she returned to the others and encouraged them to continue. They were doing great, she said. For now, they just needed to follow the script and trust the process. Eventually, she called Wuhan back into the scene. Rising immediately, he marched toward Dongju once again, grabbed his collar, and repeated with complete seriousness that he would devour him alive if necessary, because he was now the loyal dog who would follow him everywhere. Therefore, Dongju was forbidden from secretly meeting anyone else ever again. Back in reality, the actual Wuhan was reading these scenes with alarming enthusiasm. Seeing himself portrayed as the hero clearly pleased him. Yumi, on the other hand, continued filling her thoughts with creative insults. The situation felt absurd. It was her novel, yet somehow she wasn't even allowed to write the story she wanted anymore. Then a realization suddenly struck her. Wuhan only reviewed the draft, didn't he? He wasn't actually checking the published version afterward. At that exact moment, Wuhan looked up and announced that she had finally written the story correctly. Satisfied, he told her to publish it as soon as possible before leaving. The second he disappeared, Yumi sprang into action. She immediately restored the original version she had written before his interference. All the changes that elevated Wuhan into the role of hero were removed. Once everything was back the way she wanted, she finally published the chapter. Feeling extremely pleased with herself, Yumi reasoned that there was no way someone like Wuhan would actually visit a novel website, log in, search for her story, and compare the published version with the draft. He had already reviewed it in person. Surely that was the end of it. Convinced that her secret was safe, she relaxed and decided there was nothing to worry about. Unfortunately for her, Wuhan had already logged into the website. The moment he checked the published chapter, he discovered that absolutely none of his requested changes had survived. Zhong was still the hero. Wuhan stared at the screen in disbelief before wondering what exactly he was supposed to do with this girl. Did she genuinely think he was an idiot? The following day, Daju was enthusiastically informing Dongju and Zhong that the television production team was especially excited about filming Wuhan teaching mathematics. In his opinion, that made perfect sense, because Wuhan was a genuine math genius. Both Zhong and Dongju readily agreed. Seizing the opportunity, Daju turned toward Wuhan and assured him that he would never force him to participate in the program. Still, he politely asked him to think about it one more time. Maybe his feelings would change. The appeal was completely wasted. Wuhan ignored him and walked away without even entertaining the possibility. Soon afterward, the story shifted to the school itself, where the filming crew had already arrived. The moment the cameras appeared, excitement exploded among the students. Girls repeatedly found excuses to walk in front of the cameras, hoping to appear on television. Amid all the chaos, the principal gathered the teachers together and reminded them that this was an extremely important day. The entire world would soon be looking at their school, and they needed to make a good impression. The principal continued issuing instructions with the seriousness of a military commander preparing for battle. She seemed far more excited about the television program than anyone else in the building. In fact, she was so determined to make everything perfect that she had already begun plotting behind the scenes with Daju. Their objective was simple. Somehow, no matter what it took, they needed footage of Wuhan teaching mathematics. Daju confidently assured her that there was no reason to worry because he had already arranged everything. He then summoned Yumi out of her classroom. The moment she arrived, he casually informed her that she would need to secretly record Wuhan while he was teaching mathematics. Yumi stared at him as though he had just suggested robbing a bank. Daju quickly told her not to react as if he were proposing something illegal. According to him, the task was incredibly simple. All she had to do was switch on a small camera during class and place it somewhere in front of Wuhan while he taught. That was it. Unfortunately, Yumi immediately tried to escape, because if she got caught secretly recording him, she was convinced he would somehow send her to prison. Daju rolled his eyes and he reminded her that this was technically a punishment. She had been working on something unrelated during his class, so now she had to help. Yumi quickly apologized for that previous incident, but Daju wasn't interested in hearing apologies. Instead, he handed her a script and explained that she would also need to ask Wuhan a few questions during the recording. Then he revealed another reason for choosing her specifically. Since they were neighbors, she should be willing to do him this small favor. More importantly, if the plan failed, the principal might destroy their careers. Hearing him speak so seriously immediately made Yumi nervous. However, she still wasn't fully convinced. Daju finally lost patience and decided to use a different strategy. Looking directly at her, he casually mentioned that he knew her secret. Yumi immediately froze. When she nervously asked what secret he was talking about, Daju smugly explained that he was extremely observant. Did she really think she could hide such things right under his nose? The confidence in his voice made Yumi's heartbeats skyrocket. Trying to remain calm, she claimed she had no idea what he meant. Daju simply continued. He said he had noticed her dirty thoughts, her suspicious imagination, and the strange way she looked at things from the very beginning. Therefore, if she wanted those secrets to remain hidden, she should quietly do exactly as he asked. Hearing this was enough to make Yumi's soul leave her body. She immediately became convinced that Daju somehow knew about her adult romance novels. By the time he walked away, she was sitting there in complete shock, wondering who could possibly have exposed her secret. Naturally, her first suspect was Wuhan. The story then shifted to the principal making inspection rounds throughout the school. Since filming day had finally arrived, she was checking every classroom and aggressively encouraging students to at least pretend they cared about education. While scanning the room, her eyes eventually landed on Jia, an orphaned student. The principal immediately ordered her to stand. Jenny helped Jia get up, and the principal's next question concerned her uniform. Jia quietly explained that oil had accidentally spilled on it, so she had washed it. Unfortunately, that answer only made the principal angrier. She told Jia to borrow a uniform from someone else and begged her not to make things worse. The principal admitted she was already nervous enough. Finally, she instructed Jia to pick up her desk and chair and follow her outside. Jia quietly obeyed and carried everything out of the classroom. Unfortunately for the principal, Wuhan arrived at exactly that moment. Looking around at the strange scene, he immediately asked what was happening. The rest of the students quickly gathered near the doorway to watch. The principal explained the situation and informed him that Jia would be spending the day studying alone in the counseling room. Then she instructed Jia to come with her. Wuhan immediately told Jia to return to the classroom instead. As the conversation continued, the principal became increasingly harsh. She argued that Jia was already a stain on the school's reputation and that removing her from view was the safest option. Hearing those words hurt Jia deeply. The other girls didn't look particularly happy about them either. Wuhan, however, immediately opposed the decision. He even delivered an ultimatum of his own. If Jia was removed from the classroom, then none of his students would participate in the filming. That statement genuinely shocked the principal. At the same time, the students watching nearby were becoming increasingly impressed. For once, someone was openly challenging the principal. The principal glared at Wuhan and put all of her strength into dragging the desk away. The problem was that Wuhan wasn't letting go. No matter how hard she pulled, the desk barely moved. Just then, the principal noticed the filming crew entering the teacher's office. Realizing she had more urgent problems to handle, she reluctantly informed Wuhan that they would continue this argument later. With that promise hanging in the air, she hurried off toward the crew. Once she was gone, Wuhan calmly instructed Jia to return to class and told the other students to go back to their seats as well. The filming finally began, and unlike the chaos everyone had feared, the opening scenes went surprisingly smoothly. Dongju and Daju were filmed walking through the school alongside a couple of students while casually discussing academics and school life. A little later, Zhong joined them, and the four of them ended up looking so polished and professional that the production crew seemed genuinely pleased with the footage. By the time the interview ended with the Singapore girl Jenny, the principal looked as though she might adopt Jenny on the spot. Unfortunately, the situation became significantly more dangerous when Yumi's friends stepped in front of the camera. Unlike Jenny, they seemed determined to destroy months of preparation within a matter of minutes. Rather than talking about academics or the school's achievements, they began introducing themselves, complimenting their own looks, and enthusiastically discussing how handsome the teachers were. Meanwhile, Yumi was still desperately trying to escape the mission Daju had assigned her. She pleaded with him one last time, insisting that she couldn't possibly go through with secretly recording Wuhan. Daju, however, remained unmoved. Unfortunately, Wuhan happened to see Daju and Yumi together. The moment Daju left, Wuhan's eyes narrowed with suspicion. It was obvious that something strange had been happening between the two of them. Yumi immediately noticed the look on his face and responded with an awkward smile before hurrying into the classroom. That smile did absolutely nothing to reduce his suspicions. Inside the classroom, Wuhan continued teaching as usual, while Yumi sat in silent panic. She couldn't stop imagining the consequences if he discovered she was secretly recording him. In her mind, the punishment escalated from detention to expulsion, and eventually to outright murder. Then another thought occurred to her. Why was she acting so guilty? As far as she knew, Wuhan had already told Daju about her secret novel. If he could betray her secrets, then perhaps she didn't need to feel so bad about this. Emboldened by that questionable logic, she finally raised her hand and called out to him. When Wuhan asked what she wanted, Yumi hesitated for several seconds before asking a surprisingly serious question. She had heard that numerous prestigious universities had offered him opportunities in the past. If that was true, then why had he turned all of them down and chosen to teach at a school instead? For the first time, Wuhan seemed genuinely caught off guard. Rather than answering immediately, Wuhan suggested that questions like those were better suited for after class, but the rest of the students had overheard everything. One by one, they began insisting that they wanted to know the answer too. Soon, the entire class was demanding a story. Some even argued that hearing about his life might inspire them to study mathematics more seriously. Faced with an entire classroom refusing to let the subject go, Wuhan finally relented. He told everyone to calm down and admitted that perhaps his story could help them think more carefully about their own futures. The moment he started speaking, Yumi quietly switched on the hidden camera. Trying to act natural, she slowly angled it toward him. Everything seemed to be working perfectly. Then disaster struck. While explaining his story, Wuhan's gaze drifted downward and landed directly on the camera in Yumi's hands. His voice stopped immediately. The classroom fell silent. Yumi froze. For several painful seconds, neither of them moved. Then Wuhan noticed another camera positioned elsewhere in the room. At that moment, everything clicked into place. His expression darkened as he walked over, picked up the device, and realized that someone had been secretly recording him. The realization hit him hard. Yumi instantly understood that the mission had officially failed. Panicking, she tried to hide the camera she was holding, but it was already too late. Wuhan walked directly over to her and calmly told her to hand it over. Yumi was so terrified that she couldn't even respond. She simply sat there clutching the camera. Eventually, Wuhan took it from her himself. The entire class watched in stunned silence. Without another word, Wuhan turned and walked away. Yumi immediately chased after him, apologizing repeatedly. She explained that the entire thing had been Daju's idea. He had told her that everyone's jobs might be at risk if she didn't help. She insisted that she had only agreed because she felt pressured. No matter how much she apologized, however, Wuhan refused to respond. Instead, he marched straight toward Daju. The confrontation happened so quickly that Daju barely had time to prepare. Wuhan demanded to know how he could possibly think it was acceptable to secretly record him. To his credit, Daju instantly switched into full innocent mode. He acted completely shocked and asked who could have done such a terrible thing. Knowing that history, how could he possibly think placing cameras in front of him was a good idea? Before Daju could answer, Zhang stepped in and tried to calm everyone down. He repeatedly asked what had happened, but Wuhan was far too angry to listen. Daju eventually lost patience and argued that the incident Wuhan was obsessing over had happened years ago. In his opinion, it was time to stop dwelling on the past and move on with life. Those words hit harder than Daju realized. The anger vanished from Wuhan's face and was replaced by something much worse. Without saying anything, he began deleting all the recorded footage from the cameras. Daju stared at him in shock. Only then did he seem to realize how deeply the issue affected him. Before the argument could continue any further, however, the principal arrived and informed Wuhan that she needed to speak with him privately. Reluctantly, he followed her to the office. The moment he was gone, Yumi turned toward Zhang and asked what exactly had happened in Wuhan's past. Zhang admitted that he didn't remember every detail, but he knew the general story. When Wuhan was younger, he had participated in a special mathematics program for gifted students. His talent attracted a great deal of attention, including attention from someone dangerous. A stalker had become obsessed with him. The man constantly followed him, secretly took photographs, and monitored his movements. Eventually, the obsession escalated even further. One day, the stalker kidnapped him. As Zhang explained the story, the scene shifted into the past. A young Wuhan sat alone in a room while a camera was pointed directly at him. Terrified and unable to escape, he had been forced to endure the experience while the stalker treated him like some kind of exhibit. The event traumatized him so severely that even years later, he couldn't tolerate cameras being pointed at him unexpectedly. Back in the present, Yumi sat there in complete shock. For the first time, she truly understood why Wuhan had reacted the way he did. The realization was so overwhelming that her stomach suddenly began to hurt. Zhang immediately became concerned and asked whether she was all right. At the same time, in the principal's office, a completely different battle was taking place. The principal pleaded with Wuhan to stop being so stubborn. According to her, people who survived in life were the ones who learned to lower their heads and compromise. She couldn't understand why he was making such a big issue out of appearing on television. It wasn't as though a camera would permanently damage his face. Despite her speech, Wuhan remained silent. When he finally stood up and prepared to leave, the principal's expression changed. Then she threw a file onto the table. Curious, Wuhan opened it and immediately froze. The file contained paperwork related to Dongju's employment. If Wuhan continued refusing to cooperate with the filming, Dongju would lose his job. She said didn't want to do this, but Wuhan had left her with no other choice. Now he needed to think carefully. If Dongju lost his position because of his stubbornness, what would happen to him afterward? Hearing this left Wuhan genuinely stunned. He looked at the principal as though seeing her for the first time, unable to believe she was willing to go this far just to get her way. So after everything is over, Wuhan walks home, visibly heartbroken, while Yumi trails quietly behind him, just as upset as he is. She desperately wants to apologize to him, but simply can't summon the courage, all while a sharp, stabbing pain is building in her stomach. When Wuhan finally sits down on a bench, Yumi approaches him and begs him to forgive her. Wuhan responds by reminding her of the question she'd once asked him in class, a moment that had genuinely excited him because he thought she was finally taking an interest in math. He'd been so hopeful that day, thinking he finally had the chance to show her that math was a subject worth putting real effort into, one where she could actually excel, but she shattered that hope completely. He tells her how hurt he felt the moment he spotted the camera near her. He blames himself for ever trusting her in the first place, but tells her it doesn't matter now and that she should just go home. Yumi, overwhelmed with guilt, apologizes to him once more, but Wuhan simply tells her to leave. As she turns to go, the pain in her stomach becomes so unbearable that she can barely walk, and she suddenly collapses to the ground. At first, Wuhan assumes she's faking it, coldly telling her not to bother with dramatics in front of him because his heart is made of stone. But when he actually looks at her, he realizes she's genuinely in agony, drenched in sweat and writhing in pain. Panicked, he rushes over and asks if she's okay, but Yumi can't even manage to speak, completely consumed by pain. Terrified now, Wuhan scoops her up and rushes her straight to the hospital, encouraging her the entire way to hold on and stay strong. Once they arrive, the doctors immediately begin examining her, but Yumi refuses to let anyone even touch her stomach, screaming in pain and crying uncontrollably. Alarmed, the doctors decide to move her to another room, and watching her being wheeled away leaves Wuhan even more shaken, desperate to understand what's actually happening. A nurse keeps shaking her head as though the situation has taken a serious turn, which only deepens Wuhan's fear, especially since no one is telling him anything concrete, just giving off increasingly grim reactions. As he sits there in a daze, he notices a nurse stepping out of Yumi's room carrying something in a plastic bag, and his mind immediately jumps to the horrifying assumption that it must be her organs, sending his fear into overdrive. Nervously, he approaches Yumi, who has now regained consciousness but still looks deeply shaken. Through tears, she tells him that she'd been feeling off for the past few days. No appetite, no motivation to do anything, but had been in severe stomach pain the entire time. Yumi begs him to save her, insisting she doesn't want to die. She's only 18, and there are still so many adult novels she wants to write. She'd always imagined that once she turned 20, she'd finally have money to spend and enjoy her life to the fullest. When the doctor walks in, he immediately asks what exactly is wrong with Yumi. The doctor explains to Yumi that everything had simply built up inside her stomach over time, and that her condition had become quite serious. She really should have come in much sooner. Terrified by this, Yumi grabs Wuhan's hand and begs him through tears to save her, insisting she feels like she's dying. The doctor was confused by how distressed she seems. Then Wuhan eventually asks the doctor directly whether Yumi's condition is really something serious. The doctor then clarifies that there's actually nothing to worry about. She'd simply been severely constipated, and they'd already cleared it out completely. Both Wuhan and Yumi are left utterly stunned by this revelation. Wuhan, baffled, asks how something as simple as constipation could possibly cause someone to lose consciousness. The doctor explains that everything inside her had been so tightly packed that there was no room left at all, which is why they'd needed to give her medication to clear everything out, and she even shows them an image comparing how impossibly full her stomach had been before, with barely any room to breathe, to how completely empty it is now. Doctors tell them that they can go home. Nothing serious, leaving both her and Wuhan completely dumbstruck at what just happened. They can't believe they'd both been so shaken and emotional over something as simple as constipation. It also dawns on Wuhan that what he saw the nurse carrying in that plastic bag earlier definitely wasn't an organ. It was something else entirely. Embarrassed beyond words, Yumi covers her face with her hands and insists that Wuhan leave. Wuhan, genuinely surprised, tells her she never fails to do something completely unexpected. He hands her bag back to her and leaves, utterly exhausted himself. Once alone, Yumi pulls the blanket off her face and mutters that she's been humiliated so badly today that she has no dignity left, and that she'll have no choice but to transfer schools. The scene cuts to Wuhan's house, where everyone is having dinner, still baffled that Wuhan had actually agreed to the filming. Daju speculates that the principal must have blackmailed him, since she's known for being ruthless and constantly changing her tactics. Dongju agrees, but wonders what excuse she could have possibly used to convince him. Just then, Wuhan walks in, and Dongju asks where he's been all this time, assuming he probably hasn't even had dinner yet. Wuhan doesn't respond. Sensing the moment, Dongju and Zhang get up, using food as an excuse to leave the room, so Daju can apologize to Wuhan privately. Daju apologizes sincerely for pressuring him into it, and secretly recording him, especially knowing everything Wuhan had already been through in the past. After thinking it over, Wuhan simply says, "It's fine." Everyone is stunned that he forgave Daju so easily. Wuhan then calls Daju by his old, unflattering nickname, joking that nothing more could really be expected from someone like him, which is why he's decided not to hold it against him. Meanwhile, Yumi lies in her room, completely humiliated, wondering how much more embarrassment she still has left to endure. Feeling like her dignity has been completely stripped away, then, unexpectedly, she recalls the memory of Wuhan carrying her while rushing her to the hospital, clearly worried about her, and finds herself admitting that his broad shoulders had actually felt comforting and safe, giving her an unexpected sense of warmth. But she quickly snaps out of that thought, scolding herself for even thinking something so ridiculous, insisting she could never think fondly of someone as arrogant as Wuhan, who she believes only exists in her life to make her miserable. She decides she'd rather think about Gajong or focus on her novel instead. The scene cuts to the next morning, where Yumi is quietly sneaking a glance into Wuhan's house when he suddenly appears in front of her, staring her down. She greets him briefly and tries to walk away quietly, but Wuhan stops her to share that a new report has just come out about constipation, based on research conducted on middle and high school students. According to this research, the three biggest causes of constipation are lack of physical exercise, eating too much fast food, and staying up too late. And he tells her that, in his opinion, all three of these factors likely contributed to what happened to her yesterday. Yumi tries to brush it off by saying sorry again, but he responds that he's no saint who'll just keep forgiving people, especially a student who stabbed him in the back, and walks off. Once he's gone, Yumi finally exhales in relief, just as everyone else steps outside. Zhang teases her, asking what kind of constipation was bad enough to land her in the hospital. Dongju then asks, more gently, if she's really okay, admitting he felt terrible that she had to be admitted because of this. Daju chimes in, joking that he can't understand how she manages to eat so much that she ends up in the hospital, calling her genuinely strange, but thanking her for yesterday nonetheless. Yumi suddenly stops and asks Daju about something he'd mentioned the day before, that he knew her secret. Daju, confused, asks what secret she's talking about. She reminds him that he'd claimed to know something, but Daju insists he has no idea what she means. Yumi stares at him in disbelief before realizing, to her shock, that Daju had completely fooled her, pretending he knew something just to see her reaction, when in reality, he knew nothing at all, which means, to her relief, that no one actually knows anything about her adult novels. As the car prepares to leave and Yumi starts walking away, Daju suddenly steps outside and shouts her name loudly across the neighborhood, announcing that ending up in the hospital because of constipation is nothing to be ashamed of. Yumi, mortified beyond words, feels like she could die on the spot. devastated that something so deeply personal has now become public knowledge, leaving her with practically no dignity left to salvage. At school, Woohan took attendance in class, but when he realizes that Jia hasn't shown up for school today, he immediately looks straight at Yumi, since he'd specifically placed her in charge of keeping an eye on Jia. Yumi instantly senses she's about to be in trouble, and sure enough, after finishing attendance, Wuhan calls her outside. Yumi reluctantly follows him out, clearly annoyed. Once outside, Wuhan asks her directly why Jia hasn't come to school. Yumi claims she genuinely doesn't know. Wuhan explains that she's the only one who can actually help Jia stay in this school, because she's the only one who notices her at all, and it's precisely that quality he'd come to rely on. Reflecting on it, Yumi realizes he has a point. He continues, telling her to think this through carefully and reach out to Jia, because loneliness is a genuinely painful thing. He asks her to imagine how much better school would feel if someone waited for her. She tells him she thinks rushing things with Jia wouldn't be the right approach. Just like calming down a wary cat, they need to take things slow with her too. Wuhan stays quiet for a moment before agreeing that she can handle it however she thinks best, but warns her to keep a close eye on Jia regardless, otherwise he'll dock her 4 points. Yumi grows visibly anxious at the threat. Wuhan then adds one more thing, asking her to promise she won't stab him in the back again by betraying her homeroom teacher's trust. Yumi insists she never would. Back in class, Jenny asks Yumi why Jia always seems to keep to herself. Yumi replies that some people simply prefer solitude, and Jia might just be one of those people who's more comfortable being alone. Jenny admits that, honestly, Jia scares her a little since she seems intimidating, like she wouldn't let something slide if Jenny accidentally made a mistake around her. Yumi laughs this off, insisting Jia isn't scary at all, just quiet. She recalls how, back when they were in the same section, Jia would quietly pick up any chalk that fell on the floor without anyone even asking her to. Yumi explains that sometimes actions speak louder than words, and that's simply who Jia is, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Jenny seems convinced by this. Just then, Jia walks into class, and Yumi gets up from her seat, greeting her and gently asking why she was running late. As usual, Jia doesn't respond, so Yumi quietly returns to her own seat. Meanwhile, Jia watches her, almost as if she wants to be friends with Yumi, but simply doesn't know how to reach out, staying isolated for now and eventually turns her face away. In the next class, Dongju walks into class to teach and announces that, to celebrate Literature Month, the school will be holding a poetry and art exhibition, and each class needs to select one representative. He asks if anyone is interested in writing a poem. Everyone glances around at each other until one of Yumi's friends speaks up, suggesting Yumi, praising her writing skills. Another friend chimes in, adding that Yumi is always writing something and had even won first prize in a writing competition the previous year. Everyone seems impressed, and Yumi beams with pride. Dongju agrees that she should be the one to represent the class, and Yumi happily accepts. She then suggests that Goya could represent the class for drawing. Dongju agrees and asks Goya directly if she's interested, and she shyly confirms that she'd love to participate. After class, Yumi is busy cleaning when Dongju walks in and asks if she's cleaning just to earn extra points. She admits that yes, she can no longer trust when Wuhan might dock her points, so she's building up a cushion for the future. Dongju sits her down for a conversation and reveals that back when they first met and he'd assumed she was secretly recording him, that's no longer something he believes, but he now knows she wasn't actually filming him. Yumi is stunned by this, wondering why Wuhan is still holding it against her, if that's the case. Then, realization dawns on her, and she asks if it's because of the glasses she'd broken. Dongju, confused, asks what glasses she means, and she explains about the glasses. Dongju is surprised to learn that Yumi was the one who'd returned them. He'd had no idea. Yumi, in turn, is baffled that Wuhan had told everyone about her constipation, but never mentioned this. Dongju reassures her that it's not that Wuhan hates her, and tells her not to take anything he says too personally. Yumi tells him not to worry about her, since she's already gotten used to this kind of treatment. Changing the subject, she tells him how happy she was to hear about his debut in the literature world. Dongju thanks her and shares that he's loved writing poetry since middle school, and writing his feelings out is the healthiest way to release them. Yumi finds this genuinely fascinating and asks him for advice on how to write a good novel. After thinking it over, Dongju tells her that every character needs their own distinct voice, and that this is genuinely important. Yumi repeats this to herself, clearly impressed, telling him he's amazing, and that she'll remember this advice well. Dongju then asks if he could read her novels sometime, but Yumi laughs and firmly turns him down. Just then, Goya spots Yumi laughing and chatting with her crush, Dongju. She's clearly unhappy about it, and a wave of jealousy washes over her. Back in class, Yumi notices Goya and teasingly asks if she'd gone to the canteen. Goya asks where Yumi had been instead, and Yumi excitedly explains that she'd been talking with Dongju, gushing about how amazing he is, how he'd entered the spring contest multiple times, failed repeatedly, but eventually won. But whatever happens, she reassures Goya that the two of them will both give it their absolute best. Goya listens quietly to all of this, but she's clearly bothered by how close Yumi seems to be getting with Dongju. After school, Yumi is sitting down to write her novel, with two folders open in front of her, one containing the fake story she shows Wuhan, and the other holding the real story she's actually writing for her novel. At first, she tries coming up with another fake story for Wuhan, but when nothing comes to mind, she ends up continuing the real storyline of her novel instead. This leads us into episode 5, where Wuhan stops Dongju and asks why he stopped coming over to his house. Dongju tells him flatly that he's never coming back. Wuhan asks if he's lost his mind, pointing out that without his tutoring, Dongju will fail math this year. Dongju simply replies that he's fine, letting that happen. As he starts to walk away, Wuhan offers him money, pointing out that Dongju clearly needs it, and that money is exactly why he's been going to Zhang as well. Wuhan demands to know what Zhang has that he doesn't, insisting they're both using money to win Dongju over. Dongju admits Wuhan has a point, but says Zhang genuinely cares for him. Wuhan accuses Dongju of becoming arrogant now that he has two choices. Dongju fires back that if Wuhan had treated him with kindness instead of constantly humiliating him, he never would have left. When Wuhan tells him to choose between them, Dongju warns he'll regret never valuing him, but Wuhan vows he'll never regret it. So after finishing the chapter, Yumi starts writing a fake version meant only for Wuhan. Later, Wuhan visits to read it. In the story, he confronts Dongju over meeting Zhang, eventually admitting he's jealous and threatening to kill him if he leaves. The episode ends there. After reading, Wuhan remains completely unfazed because he already knows Yumi wrote this version just for him, leaving Yumi nervously wondering if he disliked it. Without saying a word, Wuhan simply gets up and walks out, leaving Yumi utterly confused about what just happened. Later, as she's walking home with him, she teases him, pointing out that she's practically turned him into the hero of her story, yet he's still acting all annoyed. Wuhan stands waiting at the bus stop, ignoring her. Yumi then notices something and points out that he still has tape holding his glasses together, asking if his new glasses haven't arrived yet, joking that they must be expensive, and that if she had the money, she'd genuinely buy him a new pair. Wuhan asks if she's finally realizing her mistake. She admits quite sincerely that yes, she truly does feel remorseful about it. Wuhan stays quiet for a moment, then tells her she's free to write her novel however she wants, following her own heart. Yumi is completely stunned, asking if he's genuinely giving her permission to write the story she actually wants to write. He confirms that he is, and Yumi practically lights up with happiness. She asks what changed his mind, and he simply tells her to do whatever feels right to her. Overjoyed, Yumi opens up, admitting that on the day she'd collapsed, she genuinely believed she was going to die, but the encouragement he'd given her that day had helped her feel a little calmer, and she thanked him again for how worried he'd been about her. Wuhan tells Yumi that some things in life are too frightening for people to understand, but if someone truly wants to, they should take the risk anyway. Looking at her warmly, he hints that he's willing to do the same. Yumi doesn't understand a single word, but is unaware that Wuhan is actually promising to make an effort to truly understand her. Yumi then took the bus to go home, her thoughts drifting repeatedly back to Wuhan's last words to her. Wuhan happens to be on the same bus and notices her distraction, asking what's on her mind. She quickly lies, claiming she's been thinking about Pythagoras. Taking the bait, Wuhan launches into a detailed explanation, leaving Yumi stunned all over again at just how deeply obsessed he is with math. Once she gets home, her mother scolds her for not taking care of herself, pointing out that her carelessness led directly to her constipation. Her mother then mentions wanting to meet Wuhan personally to thank him for getting Yumi to the hospital, but quickly follows this up with complaints about how many demerit points he's given her. Unexpectedly, Yumi finds herself defending him, insisting he isn't a bad person at heart and that she's already thanked him herself, so there's no need for her mother to meet him. Her mother is left puzzled by her sudden change in attitude. Confused by her own sudden feelings, Yumi starts wondering if she is being manipulated somehow. After all, Wuhan has always been strict with her, constantly targeting her over the smallest things, and now, out of nowhere, he's saying he wants to understand her better. She decides she won't let herself fall for it, and resolves to start avoiding him from now on. The next morning at breakfast, Daju announces that a professor has just won a medal at the Mathematics Olympiad. He complains in front of the other teachers that Wuhan shouldn't have turned down Princeton's offer, sparking an argument between Zhong and Daju, while Wuhan and Daju quietly continue eating breakfast, staying out of it. Meanwhile, Yumi waits outside the teacher's housing for Wuhan, only to overhear the other teachers mention that he's already left for school. Later in class, Yumi finds herself unknowingly gazing at Wuhan with unmistakable fondness, quietly noticing every small habit of his. Meanwhile, she confides in Goya about her strange new feelings, admitting that she used to be completely infatuated with her own fictional character, but now can't stop thinking about a real person in her actual life. Goya encourages her, telling her she should simply be honest with the boy about her feelings. Around this time, the two of them learn that Jenny is heading off on a long field trip for an extra credit report writing project. Later, in the library, Yumi spots Goya reading one of Dongju's writings, and Goya starts praising his writing skills. Just then, Dongju walks into the library, and Yumi goes over to chat with him, prompting a wave of jealousy in Goya at how effortlessly Yumi talks to him. When Yumi returns, she asks Goya why she didn't come over too, pointing out it was a perfect chance to say hi. Goya remarks that the two of them seem quite close, and Yumi brushes it off, explaining that he was only giving her feedback on her poem. But Goya assumes Yumi had actually been talking about her feelings for Dongju, convincing herself that Yumi has a crush on him. That same night, Yumi sits down to write a new chapter of her BL story, but without even realizing it, she casts Wuhan's character as the main lead, while turning Daju's character into Dongju's love interest. She's genuinely shocked by this sudden shift in her own story, and even more startled that Wuhan has taken over as the protagonist. As she keeps writing, she starts imagining herself as Wuhan's love interest and immediately panics at the thought. Meanwhile, Wuhan receives a message from a girl saying she's returned to Korea and is excited to see him again. The next day, Goya once again catches Yumi having a private conversation with Dongju, and her jealousy intensifies. She confronts Yumi directly, demanding she admit the truth about liking Dongju. Yumi denies it, but she also can't bring herself to reveal what's actually going on, instead asking Goya to simply trust her. Goya remains upset regardless, and tension begins building within their friend group. That night, lying in bed, Yumi replays Goya's reaction in her mind and feels terrible about it. The next day, she heads to a cafe to study, but while she's there, it suddenly hits her. She realizes she genuinely does have feelings for Wuhan. Just then, she spots him right there in the same cafe. Her heart lifts instantly at the sight of him until she notices a girl walking up to him and hugging him, the two of them clearly close, and watching this unfold shatters Yumi's heart completely. Meanwhile, the two of them are reminiscing about their old math classes and research days from way back. Wuhan's friend teases him, pointing out that he never even missed her or congratulated her on anything. He responds that he'd actually been thinking about how happy he was for her. She admits she was genuinely shocked when he suddenly quit the Olympiad halfway through, pointing out that he definitely could have continued if he'd wanted to. The two of them keep laughing and chatting away, and watching all this only deepens Yumi's gloom until suddenly she hears a voice beside her. It's her music teacher, who asks what she's doing there. Startled, she quickly claims she'd just been studying and was actually about to leave since she was done. He asks, somewhat surprised, since when did she start actually studying? His voice catches Wuhan and his friend's attention. and they both turn to look over, just as Yumi hurriedly starts packing up her things to make a quick exit. But it's too late. He spots Wuhan and immediately lights up, exclaiming in mock amazement that the math genius is sitting in a cafe with a beautiful woman and asking who she is. He marches over with exaggerated enthusiasm, claiming he recognizes her from the news as the recent Fields Medal winner, even calling her professor. He then starts teasing Wuhan that he is dating. But Wuhan drags him away, telling Yumi to go home and study. Before leaving, Yumi quickly introduces herself as Wuhan's student. The woman warmly compliments how adorable she is, then turns to Wuhan, saying they'll meet again soon and asking him to seriously think about what she'd said earlier. Wuhan starts walking away, completely ignoring Yumi while she follows behind, rambling about how beautiful his friend is. Irritated, Wuhan snaps, asking why it's any of her business. She innocently says she was only curious about who the woman's boyfriend might be. Wuhan warns that if her math score doesn't go above 50, he'll tell her parents everything about her novel at the next parent-teacher meeting. Horrified, Yumi immediately begs him to reconsider, but he simply tells her to keep walking. Just then, Yumi gets a message from her brother asking her to bring him a cola. As they walk, she asks Wuhan to wait while she quickly buys one from a nearby shop. When she returns, she thanks him for waiting. Wuhan remarks that she's drinking cola again, despite it being what landed her in the hospital with constipation last time. She explains it's not for her, but for her brother, who's blackmailing her into doing whatever he wants. Curious, Wuhan asks what kind of secret her brother has over her. She admits that only two people know the truth about her novel. It's him and his brother. Wuhan asks her why she loves writing this kind of thing so much. She admits she doesn't really know why, but she simply loves writing novels. It's something she genuinely enjoys doing. After coming home, Yumi goes back to writing her novel, still thinking about Wuhan's friend from the cafe. This time, she casts Wuhan's female friend as the villain of her story, someone who kidnaps Dongju. Then comes Wuhan's dramatic entrance, arriving to rescue him, leading into an intense, dramatic fight scene. Yumi, deep into her writing, imagines herself once again as a character in her own story, and this time, the novel unfolds entirely on her terms. The next morning, Wuhan is taking attendance when Jia walks in late once again, but this time, everyone is visibly shocked because there's a strange, unpleasant smell around her, almost like alcohol, and a noticeable bruise on her as well. Everyone stares at her, but Wuhan says nothing, simply announcing that whoever handled cleaning duty will need to redo it. Yumi immediately agrees to clean again. Wuhan then sends Jia to the nurse's office. As she's leaving, she runs into Eden and greets him, but he immediately notices the smell on her and stops her, escorting her straight to the principal's office. Wuhan is soon called to the principal's office as well, where he speaks up in Jia's defense, apologizing sincerely and asking for one more chance, both for himself and for Jia. Seeing his determination, the principal reluctantly agrees. Afterward, Wuhan sits Jia down and tells her she needs to write a full essay reflecting on her mistake, reminding her that showing up having been drinking is a serious offense, and asking how much longer he's expected to keep covering for her. Jia agrees to write the essay. Meanwhile, at lunchtime, Goya gets up when Yumi comes and moves to sit elsewhere instead of joining her for lunch. Yumi is clearly hurt watching this unfold, but she quietly continues eating on her own. Later in class, she tries talking to Goya again, but she simply ignores her and walks out of the classroom. Their other friends ask if the two of them had a fight, but Yumi denies it and refuses to explain anything. Meanwhile, Wuhan finds himself replaying his friend's words from earlier, her request that he join her on a research project. Lost in thought, he develops a headache and steps outside for a walk, where Dongju joins him and asks if he's all right. Meanwhile, Yumi sits down to write her novel when she gets a message from her brother demanding cola again. Frustrated, she tells him she's just sat down and will bring it tomorrow instead, but he threatens to tell their mom, forcing her to reluctantly agree and head out to get it for him, begging him not to say anything to their mother. On her way out, she happens to spot Wuhan and, delighted at the sight of Wuhan, decides to follow them. As she trails behind, she overhears Dongju telling Wuhan that he's being given an incredible opportunity and shouldn't waste his time staying here out of some misplaced sense of obligation, urging him to go abroad, to America, to pursue his research. Overhearing this, Yumi blurts out in shock, asking if Wuhan is really planning to move to America. The moment goes completely silent, with Yumi staring at him and Wuhan staring right back. She then bombarding Wuhan with question after question, asking if he's really planning to move to the US and whether he truly won't be around for her senior year. But Wuhan doesn't answer any of her questions, simply telling her it's getting late and she should head home. Yumi is left utterly heartbroken. Back home, she finds herself completely unable to focus on her novel, unable to write even a single word, her mind consumed with questions whether Wuhan really needs to go and whether that woman from the cafe is truly his girlfriend. She tries to reassure herself that of course he'd have a girlfriend at some point, that's just how it is. The next day in class, Wuhan announces that Jia is absent again, then moves on to mention that details about a career experience program have been shared in the class group chat and any interested students can sign up. He then dismisses class and leaves. Yumi and her friends start discussing Jia's absence, wondering if she's in some kind of trouble, and that's when Yumi suddenly remembers the bruise she'd seen on Jia's hand. After class, Yumi heads to Jia's orphanage to check on her, asking the warden why she didn't come to school today and if everything's all right. The warden explains that Jia isn't there right now, she's likely gone to her part-time job. Yumi asks for the address of that job, and as she turns around, she's startled to find Wuhan standing right there. She tells him Jia isn't at the orphanage, but he asks her instead what she's doing out so late, telling her he'll handle it from here, and that she should go home. Yumi refuses, telling him she's simply exhausted from constantly worrying about demerit points. A response that leaves Wuhan completely stunned, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Meanwhile, Jia is working as a waitress at a restaurant, where some customers are mistreating her and pressuring her to drink with them. Witnessing this, Yumi rushes in, pulls her away, and demands to know why she's doing this kind of work. Just then, a group of thugs shows up, demanding Jia repay money she owes them. Yumi tries to protect her, but the thugs turn on Yumi too, suggesting that if she cares so much about her friend, she should just pay off Jia's debt herself, and they start harassing her as well. That's when Wuhan arrives and steps in to rescue them both. He asks the thugs exactly how much money Jia owes them, and they tell him the amount, $50,000. Wuhan immediately transfers the money to their account and records video evidence confirming they've received full payment and will no longer bother Jia, which the thugs reluctantly agree to. Jia tells Wuhan she'll pay him back every last cent, but he tells her there's no need. She should simply focus on school and her studies instead. Just then, he notices Yumi quietly taking a photo of the thug's business card as additional evidence. On the way home, Yumi tells Jia she doesn't need to keep working that part-time job anymore, but Jia insists she can't quit since she needs the money to move out of the orphanage and get a place of her own. After dropping Jia off, Yumi praises Wuhan, pointing out that no teacher has ever bothered to genuinely look out for Jia the way he has. Wuhan responds that he doesn't think Yumi came along tonight purely out of fear of demerit points either. Deep down, she genuinely cared about Jia too. The next day, Yumi arrives at school and is thrilled to see Jia present in class. Jenny has also returned from her trip and is handing out gifts to everyone, and when she gives one to Jia, she actually thanks her, leaving Jenny overjoyed that Jia finally spoke to her. Meanwhile, Yumi notices Goya sitting unusually withdrawn and quiet. Just then, Wuhan walks into class and is visibly pleased to see Jia back as well. After class, Jenny spots Jia walking with the same two thugs from before, though Jia has no idea who they actually are. Noticing their expensive car, Jenny takes a photo and posts it in the group chat, commenting that she had no idea Jia was so wealthy. But Yumi rushes over to Wuhan in a panic, showing him the photo and warning him that Jia is in danger. Wuhan tells her to stay back while he goes alone to bring Jia to safety, heading straight to where the thugs are. When he arrives, they tell him they knew he'd show up, revealing that they'd never actually included the interest in what they'd been paid earlier, and warning that if they don't get their money, they'll force Jia into some illicit line of work instead. Jia pleads with Wuhan not to pay them, insisting she can handle it herself. The thugs then surround Wuhan threateningly, but just then, all three of our male leads make a dramatic, hero-style entrance to back him up. Yumi arrives right after and rushes straight to Wuhan, who is by now badly injured. The thugs immediately turn their threats on the three teachers as well, warning them to walk away now or face the consequences. But it's Dongju, the sweetest, most harmless-looking one of the bunch, who calmly tells Zhang and Daju to go tend to Wuhan, assuring them that he'll handle everything else himself. Both teachers obey without hesitation and rush to Wuhan's side, leaving Yumi genuinely worried about how someone like Dongju could possibly manage all of this on his own. Then one of the thugs lunges at him, and in a single motion, Dongju flattens him completely. And here comes the real plot twist. Dongju turns out to be an absolutely lethal fighter, and as he moves, both his skills and a mafia-style tattoo are suddenly on full display for everyone to see. Yumi's jaw drops so hard it practically hits the floor. Wuhan, catching her reaction, instinctively tries to cover her eyes. Meanwhile, the thugs, thoroughly beaten and now genuinely terrified, start begging for mercy, swearing this will never happen again. Dongju warns them coldly that if they ever come near these two girls again, he'll leave them in a state where they won't even recognize their own reflection, and the thugs are left visibly trembling. Meanwhile, Goya is in full panic mode because Yumi isn't picking up her calls. The moment Yumi appears, Goya forgets every bit of her earlier anger and pulls her into a hug, admitting how scared she'd been, asking what she would have done if something had actually happened to her. Yumi becomes deeply emotional at this. She finally confesses that she actually has feelings for Wuhan, admitting she should have told Goya from the very beginning. Goya makes it clear that even if Yumi had liked Dongju, it wouldn't have been a problem at all. Her anger had never been about that. She was only upset that Yumi had been hiding things from her because best friends shouldn't keep secrets from each other. After this emotional session, Yumi excitedly recounts Dongju's fighting skills to Goya, how he thoroughly demolished those thugs, and how there was a gangster tattoo on his hand, leaving Goya absolutely stunned. Meanwhile, Daju and Zhang are busy applying ointment to Wuhan and Dongju's injuries, where Wuhan makes an enormous dramatic production out of his pain while Dongju doesn't let out so much as a single wince. Though he is anxious, worried about the fact that two students have now seen his tattoo, and unsure what might come of it. The teachers also talk about how Zhang had once helped him escape that dangerous group in his past, a conversation that quietly proves just how strong their bond really is. And of course, Yumi being Yumi, there's no way she's letting this go to waste. She immediately writes the entire fighting sequence and the tattoo reveals straight into her novel. The next day at school, Jia walked into class on time for the very first time, and in full uniform, no less, leaving every student stunned, though genuinely happy for her. Just then, Wuhan arrives to take class, and the students immediately notice the injury marring his otherwise flawless, glowing face, bombarding him with questions about how he got hurt. One girl is so worked up she's practically ready to go fight someone on his behalf. But our unbothered Wuhan brushes it all off with a single word, says he's perfectly fine, and moves straight into taking attendance. Spotting Yumi and Goya chatting like nothing happened, Jenny remarks that the two of them have finally patched things up, to which Goya replies that they were never fighting in the first place, a moment that makes the whole group's bond look incredibly sweet. After class is dismissed, Goya lingers behind, watching Wuhan as he leaves, and Yumi asks whether the tattoo revelation has soured her opinion of Dongju. But Goya, operating on an entirely different wavelength from the rest of humanity, declares that she's going to finish college and land a great job so that she can protect Dongju in the future, leaving Yumi thinking to herself that her friend's particular brand of madness has officially started up again. Goya then encourages Yumi to just go ahead and tell Wuhan how she feels. Through the entire extra class, Yumi sits lost in thought, trying to work out how on earth she's going to pull that off. Once extra class ends, she chases after Wuhan and stops him, fully intending to confess her feelings. But the second she's actually face to face with him, her nerves get the better of her and she completely changes the subject, telling him instead that she won't be able to attend extra classes anymore. Wuhan responds by asking what happened to the promise she made him 10 years ago, pointing out that she'd made some very grand declarations back then, so what changed now? Yumi has no idea what he's talking about and asks what promise she supposedly made a decade ago, but Wuhan simply walks off without giving her an answer. What neither of them realizes is that Hasu, the class topper who happens to have a crush on Wuhan, has witnessed the entire exchange. That night, Yumi calls Goya, who suggests she write Wuhan a love letter since writing is where Yumi genuinely shines. But Yumi has a different idea entirely. She decides to convey her feelings through her novel, writing a scene where Dongju's character confesses to Wuhan's character. The next day at school, she asks Wuhan whether he's read the latest chapter. He tells her he found it deeply strange, wondering where this sudden confession scene came from, and walks away. Later in class, Wuhan asks the students whether they have completed their assignment, and Yumi turns out to be the only one who hasn't. He scolds her for giving her studies absolutely no priority whatsoever. Afterward, in the canteen, all her friends start tearing into Wuhan for how rude he is, and Yumi immediately jumps to his defense, insisting he isn't a bad person. Everyone is completely floored by this and teasingly asks why she's taking his side so hard, wondering aloud whether she's got a crush on him. Yumi has absolutely no answer for that. Meanwhile, Hasu overhears a group of students discussing a novel that seems to be based entirely on their own teachers. Intrigued, she reads it privately and recognizes a startling number of lines, dialogue Wuhan had said in class, and some he'd only ever said during extra classes. She starts wondering who could possibly be behind it, and her suspicion lands squarely on Yumi. We then see Yumi catch sight of Wuhan on the phone with someone, and the smile on his face leaves her utterly heartbroken. She tells Goya she wants to give up, that she simply can't do this anymore, and Goya pulls her into a hug to comfort her. Meanwhile, at breakfast, Daju teases Wuhan about his friend, pointing out that the two of them have been meeting an awful lot lately and insisting something must be going on between them. Wuhan informs him that she has already left for the US, which naturally spirals into one of their signature cute little squabbles. Back home, Yumi checks the comments on her novel and finds her readers absolutely thrilled about the confession scene, which leaves her wondering why Wuhan was the only person on Earth who found it weird. Then, she stumbles across a comment asking whether the author attends Muriam Girls' School, her own school, and instant panic sets in. At school the next day, she's visibly on edge, which Hasu immediately picks up on, while a deep fear takes root in Yumi that the entire school might be about to find out her secret. She even starts wondering whether she should just delete the novel altogether. Outside school, Hasu approaches Jenny and asks if she's heard about the novel. Jenny says she has no idea what she's talking about, so Hasu explains that it was written by a student at their own school and is based on a love story between their teachers, leaving Jenny absolutely stunned. During extra class, Hasu makes a point of approaching Wuhan right in front of Yumi, peppering him with math questions, and then handing him a cold drink. Afterward, Yumi waits outside for him, and once Hasu is gone, she tells him she wants to take a break from writing her web novels. Wuhan asks whether she's losing her confidence, and she insists that's not it. He tells her she should think back to how she felt the very first time she started writing these novels, saying the answer to whether she should take a break will come to her on its own. Then he hands her the cold drink bottle Hasu had given him, all while Hasu watches the entire exchange from her hiding spot. The whole thing starts, as these things usually do, with jealousy, the kind that curdles quietly in the back of a classroom until it finally boils over. So the next day, Hasu marches straight to Wuhan Sur, ready to drop her nuclear bomb that Yumi has been writing BL novels. She's practically vibrating with anticipation, waiting for the humiliation to land, and Wuhan Sur just blinks. He already knew. Somewhere in Hasu's head, you can almost hear a tiny balloon deflating, so she pivots. If she can't destroy Yumi, she'll accuse the teacher instead. You give her special treatment, she snaps, when you should be paying attention to topper students. Students like, say, purely hypothetically, her. Then she storms out, straight to the washroom because every great villain needs a private lair, and that's where she does the real damage. One message in the group chat, and Yumi's secret is out. She writes novels about the teachers. By the time the news finishes circulating, Yumi has been upgraded from ordinary student to the single hottest topic in the entire school. But Hasu isn't done. Oh no, she takes it all the way up the chain, straight to the principal. Yumi writes novels about the teachers, and then delivers the finishing move with the calm of a seasoned lawyer. Imagine, she says, if the media got hold of this. Think of the school's reputation. Its manipulation so smooth you almost have to applaud. Elsewhere, Goya grabs Yumi and pulls her somewhere quiet, and asks the question directly, did you actually write that novel? And Yumi, terrified, cornered, out of places to hide, confesses everything. Goya's reaction isn't anger, it's recognition. So that's why you've been floating around like a ghost for weeks. If you'd just told me, she says, You wouldn't have had to carry all of this alone. And Yumi admits the truth underneath the truth. She was ashamed of herself. She couldn't say it out loud. So Goya does the only thing a real friend can do at that moment. She goes for the joke. Yumi, she says, you are completely, certifiably insane. You wrote a story about the teachers. And there it is. The first smile Yumi has managed in days. Back in class, the rest of Yumi's friends corner Hasu. There was no reason to blast that into the group chat, they tell her. She didn't commit a crime. She wrote a novel. That's it. But another girl isn't having it. Fine. Whatever, she says, but not about the teachers. That's crossing a line. And then she keeps going, all the way past the line herself, announcing to the room that Yumi is a girl with a cheap, filthy mind, which is, of course, the exact moment Yumi walks in. The girl doesn't stop. If anything, the audience energizes her, and she starts tearing Yumi down in front of the entire school. That's when Goya's patience officially leaves the building. What follows is a catfight of genuinely spectacular quality. It ends only because Wuhan Sir walks in, and the whole room freezes mid-chaos like someone hit pause. Then he says 4 quiet words that land heavier than any shouting could. Yumi, my office, now. And in that office, Yumi says something that tells you everything about her. Sir, just tell them you didn't know anything about this. I don't want anyone pointing fingers at you. She's the one on fire, and she's worried about the smoke reaching someone else. Wuhan hears it and asks the obvious question. Even now, in a situation like this, why are you thinking about everyone but yourself? Then, he gets practical. This is going to the committee. Prepare exactly what you're going to say. And then, without hesitation, I was part of this too. I'll take full responsibility. But the principal's office is a colder room entirely. You made a joke out of your own teachers, she tells her. Delete the novel, immediately. And then the sentence Yumi has been dreading, you'll be expelled from this school. Meanwhile, Daju, Dongju, and Jong are having their own version of the conversation. Daju is firm. What Yumi did was seriously wrong. Dongju Sir agrees and then quietly opens a door. If we all state that we have no problem with it, she might survive this. Then Wuhan walks in, and Daju turns to him with the question hanging over everything. So what punishment do you think Yumi deserves? Back at school, Jia finds her and asks the simple thing nobody else has asked. Are you okay? Don't take what those girls say seriously, she tells her. They'll talk. They always talk. And in a few days, they'll have forgotten the whole thing. And then comes the hardest room of all, home. Yumi kneels in front of her parents and tells them the truth. She writes novels. She loves writing novels. When she was writing, it felt like every problem in her life quietly disappeared for a while. Her father, to her surprise, seems genuinely supportive, but then she gets to the part she can't soften. This time she wrote about her own teachers, the entire school knows, and a committee is being called. And finally, she runs out of words altogether. I can't explain any more than this. Read it yourself. She hands over the laptop and walks out. Yumi then sits down, heart heavy as wet cement, and writes an apology letter to the readers who loved her work. Writing these stories made me so happy, she tells them, but this story is based on someone else's life, so I can't continue it. And then, crying, she deletes her novels, every last one of them. The next day starts with something very deceptively ordinary. Breakfast. Yumi sits with her parents on the morning of the committee meeting, and her little brother is firmly Team Yumi, a small, loyal army of one. Her mother is more measured. Whatever the school decides, we accept. Across town, the teachers are running the same conversation, and they land in the same place. Yumi has to take responsibility for what she did. No shortcuts, no rescue mission. And then the committee actually convenes, and the principal invites everyone to share their point of view. Yumi's mother goes first, apologizing to the entire room on her daughter's behalf and asking for one more chance. Yumi isn't mature enough yet, she says, to fully grasp the consequences of her own actions, which is, honestly, the single most accurate description of a teenager ever delivered under oath. Then the principal turns to the teachers who were, shall we say, directly affected by the literature. Daju speaks for them and executes a beautiful diplomatic loop, talking at length before landing gently back at the principal's feet with a polite, "You decide." Dongju has an actual point to make. When you write about real people, he tells Yumi, their consent isn't optional. Jong, meanwhile, takes the softer road. He thinks she deserves forgiveness. and several committee members want blood, or at least suspension. And then Wuhan stands up and detonates the room. He knew. He knew about the novels the whole time, and he apologizes to everyone for not stopping her. But here's why he didn't. He saw her talent. He saw her determination, and so he encouraged her to keep writing. Then it's Yumi's turn. She apologizes for turning real people into characters and takes full responsibility for what she did. And then calmly, she adds the part nobody was expecting. She will never stop writing. From now on, everything she writes will come from her own ideas. The room is stunned, but look closely at the four teachers, and there it is, a quiet, unmistakable flicker of pride on every single face. The principal announces the committee will deliver its final verdict in 4 days. Afterwards, Yumi apologizes to her teachers personally, and Daju immediately threatens to sue her. Then comes the real grievance. Why did you make my character such a total pervert? Am I actually like that in real life? Dongju and Jong do not hesitate for even a second. They then praise Yumi's writing and deliver the verdict that stings most out of all of them. Daju's character was the most accurate. Back in class, her friends want the full report. She tells them the committee will announce its decision in a few days. And she tells them the other thing too. Wuhan Sir knew all along, and he stood up in front of everyone and took the responsibility onto his own shoulders. Hasu hears every word of it. Meanwhile, the principal and staff are still chewing over the case, and one teacher arrives with an unexpected argument. The novel has gone genuinely, wildly popular. 10,000 comments, and that's just people demanding to know why the author deleted it. Think about the attention, he argues. A student from our school wrote something that is popular. Suddenly, the principal is caught between punishment and forgiveness, which is a far more uncomfortable place to sit than either one alone. 4 days later, the verdict finally lands. 5 days of suspension. Yumi is thrilled. Her friends are thrilled. What was supposed to be a punishment turns into a full-blown celebration, which is not usually how these announcements go. Then, Wuhan walks into class and apologizes to his students for encouraging Yumi to keep writing and for failing to stay neutral this one time. That night, Yumi shows up outside his house to thank him and asks the question she can't let go of. Why did you stand up for me? He opens his mouth to answer, but stops, then gives her the safest sentence available. Because you're my student. That's all. Somehow it sounds like considerably less than the truth. The next 5 days, Yumi enjoys her suspension at home with the enthusiasm of someone who has just been handed a paid vacation with a legal document attached. Meanwhile, Wuhan tells the other 3 teachers that he has finally made a very big decision. When she returns, her friends welcome her back like a returning war hero. And then Hasu comes to apologize, admitting that every time she saw Yumi with Wuhan, something in her twisted. That was the whole reason she exposed Yumi's secret. And Yumi, of all things, thanks her back. Because if Hasu hadn't blown the whole thing up, she'd never have found the push she needed to start writing novels from her own ideas. Somewhere, the universe is quietly taking a bow. Later, the students file into the school auditorium, where Wuhan's friend is scheduled to give a speech. Yumi gets sent off to the media room to fetch a remote control. One look, and it's obvious, she is nervous. So Yumi does what Yumi does, and talks her up. Then Wuhan appears and whisks his friend off to the stage, where she proceeds to absolutely nail the speech and leave the entire student body impressed. A photo line forms afterwards, because of course it does, and Yumi is standing in it, like everybody else. On her way out, Wuhan's friend makes a point of telling him the truth. She was terrified, and Yumi was the reason she pulled it off. Then Wuhan hits the extra class with a pop quiz, and Yumi is the very last one to hand in her paper. Which would be normal, except she hasn't written a single answer. She's written him a passage instead, an emotional one, and unmistakably a confession. You, she tells him, are the absolute value of my romance. The same night, Yumi was on the phone to Goya, breathlessly reporting the news that she confessed, and Wuhan had asked to meet her at a cafe on Saturday. Goya is duly deployed for outfit selection, and Yumi spends the rest of the week watching the calendar like a hawk. Saturday finally arrives. Yumi sits in the cafe, nervous, waiting, and then Hasu walks in. Also dressed up, also clearly here for the same reason. The two of them stare at each other in mutual horror. After a moment, they arrive at the only theory that makes sense. Wuhan must have invited them both to force some kind of friendship reconciliation. But they were completely wrong. Because Wuhan walks in and cheerfully informs the waitress that he's booked seating for 12 under the name of the extra class. You can physically watch two faces fall at the same time. Then all 12 students settle in and enjoy a very nice meal. The next morning, Wuhan wakes up and can't see anything. Just like that. He tells Daju to get him to a hospital immediately, and the doctor's verdict is blunt. Surgery has to happen now. It might restore his sight. It might not. He might never see again. At school, when Yumi learns about it from Dongju, and when she presses him, he tells her the surgery is happening today. She's out of the building before he finishes the sentence. By the time she reaches the hospital, it's already over, and Wuhan is lying there with his eyes bandaged. She doesn't say a word, and he knows anyway. He knows it's her, and he calls her in immediately. Seeing how worried she is undoes him a little, and he brings up something from a long time ago. 10 years ago, he says. She was 8. They met for the first time in a hospital, exactly like this one, and he was recovering from eye surgery then too. He helped her with her maths homework that day, and she made him a promise. Next time they met, she'd score 100 in maths. Yumi sits there absorbing the fact that she has mattered to this man for a decade, and she didn't even know it. Then, with the smoothness of a freight train, she changes the subject to his friend. Why didn't your girlfriend come visit you? Wuhan tells her, plainly, that she is a friend and nothing more. Yumi's day, already improving, goes fully vertical. At home, she asks her parents whether they ever took her to a hospital in Seoul 10 years ago. They say no, never. Which leaves her staring into the middle distance, wondering whether the girl in his story was someone else entirely. Meanwhile, Wuhan's eyes recover completely, and he decides to face the thing he's been avoiding, the camera. He agrees to sit down for a documentary interview and explains why he became a teacher, and the story he tells is the one about the little girl and the maths homework. That single experience, he says, is what pushed him toward teaching. Yumi watches the interview, and the smile on her face is worth the whole episode. Before the school holidays begin, Wuhan comes to class, and Yumi proudly parades her maths score in front of everyone, 55. Her friends are mortified. Wuhan is delighted. Both reactions are entirely correct. Then comes the goodbye. Jenny's transfer year is over, and she's heading back to Singapore. Jia finally hands over her friendship return gift, and Jenny promptly dissolves. Yumi writes her a poem. Goya paints her portrait. On the bus, Jenny falls apart properly, thinking about how lucky she was to come here and find friends like these, replaying every memory the school gave her. And then we get Yumi's own point of view and the good news. By popular demand, she's put her novel back online, and this time, she's finished it. It goes on to win the award for the most popular web novel of the year. Sometime later, her parents suddenly remembered something. They did take her to that hospital, years ago, when her father was admitted there, which settles it once and for all. The girl in Wuhan's story was Yumi all along. One night before his trip to the United States, Yumi gives Wuhan a first aid kit and says goodbye. He asks about her new web novel, and she leans in and whispers something in his ear, and the expression on his face can only be described as so done. And then, as Wuhan turns to head inside, the first snowfall of the year begins, which in Korea is considered something genuinely special. Yumi shouts to him that it's snowing, and his face lights up, and it is a perfect little moment. With that, the story comes to the end.